Chapter 1. Marissa Lachele worked diligently at her computer until she heard the doorbell. Ugh. She wished her family and friends would respect her work hours. It wasn't like she hadn't told them what those hours were a million times over. They thought since she worked from home, they were free to drop in whenever they wanted, or worse, leave their kids with her while they did some shopping or whatever else they wanted to do. She was sick of being taken advantage of. She was honestly working during the day, not just sitting around eating bonbons, though sometimes a Dove chocolate might appear magically on her desktop. Perhaps it wasn't smart for her to live in the same town where she'd grown up, with her entire family and group of friends as well. Though, her fiancé, John, lived there too, and she certainly wasn't moving away from him. She just wished he'd be willing to set a date soon. She already had her dress. She went to the door of her small apartment and opened it wide, ready to tell off whoever had disturbed her workday for the umpteenth time. She had a scathing retort on her lips when she saw, instead of a friend or sibling, two uniformed police officers standing at her door. She choked down the words she'd meant to say, and instead stared blankly. What did one say when police officers came to their door? They must have been state or county officers, because she didn't recognize either of them, and she knew everyone who worked on the police force in the town of Bobville, Arkansas. Of course, so did everyone else in town. One of the officers, a young woman with dark hair pinned atop her head, spoke first. "I regret to inform you that Mr. John Daly has been killed in a car accident. I understand he was your fiancé." Marissa put her hand to her mouth. "I talked to him this morning. He'd called her to let her know of an urgent, unexpected business trip." "Are you sure?" "Very sure. He was in the company of a Lachele Chambers." Marissa frowned. Lachele didn't work with John. They were old friends. It appears they were more than that. The officer had kind eyes. "Did your fiancé tell you where he was going?" "He said he had to go to Chicago on business, and he'd be back in a few days." The officers exchanged a look. The male officer, older than the young woman who had been speaking, responded. "Ma'am, there was nothing businesslike about the trip. Both of them were killed, but based on the items they packed, I would say they were leaving town together for more pleasurable reasons." Marissa stood there numb for a moment. How was she supposed to respond? Finding out her fiancé was both dead and cheating on her at the same time was just too much of a blow. She didn't know if she should cry for his loss or rage at his cheating. "I see. Thank you." The female officer frowned at her. "Is there someone I can call to be with you?" "No one that won't make me feel like the biggest idiot alive." "No, thank you. I'll be all right." And she would. It would just take a little time. "I appreciate you letting me know." With that, Marissa shut the door and went back to her computer, sitting down. She stared blankly for a moment at the itinerary she had been working on before the doorbell rang. For some reason, she just didn't care any longer about creating the perfect Disney vacation for random strangers. She shook her head and walked away from her computer. She had time to get this one done, and she could work hard later. Marissa couldn't believe how betrayed she felt. He was dead, after all. But, how could she stop feeling that way? The man had promised he would love her forever, and he was leaving town with Lachele? Why Lachele anyway? She was known all over town as someone who stole other women's men. She should have known, but John had always protested her suspicions, and patted her on the head as if she was just jealous. Now she knew the truth. She rubbed the back of her neck as she headed to the kitchen. It was lunchtime, and though she wasn't hungry, she knew she needed to eat. Even though her heart had been shattered into a million pieces, she had to keep going. She wasn't going to let John and Lachele destroy her. Dr. Aaron Christiansen kept the smile plastered on his face all through the meeting, during which a younger, less qualified professor was given tenure. After the meeting, he politely shook Marcus's hand, congratulating him, but he waited until everyone but the head of the history department was gone before approaching. "Bob, I don't understand why other people keep getting tenure over me. I've got the publications to back up my knowledge. My student ratings are fabulous, and I work harder than anyone else I know. What am I doing wrong?" Bob sighed. It's the way the female students react to you. It gives the image of impropriety. He shook his head. I have asked that you be the one given tenure the last 3 times we've had an opening. All 3 times I've been told that if you don't marry, we can't do anything about it. Are you seeing anyone? I know you're involved in your work, but we've got to get the girls to leave you alone. Aaron shook his head. In this day and age, you can keep from giving me tenure simply because I'm not married? The girls wait in lines outside your office for office hours. Each one is convinced she's going to become Mrs. Christiansen. Maybe if you shaved your head or wore a paper bag over it. You can't even get through the halls half the time. Aaron was a little angry, but he saw Bob's point of view. The girls had been following him in flocks since he'd started working there. His classes were 3/4 girls and 1/4 boys. It was ridiculous. All right. Maybe I'll get married then. You don't happen to know a girl who wants to marry a stranger, do you? Bob shook his head, a slight smirk on his face. No, I really don't. I guess you could pick from one of the girls clogging up the hallways in the history department. Aaron grinned briefly. I don't think that'll help me get tenure. He picked up his briefcase and headed out the door. I'll figure it out. I guess. He walked toward his office, which was right down the hall, hoping that there wouldn't be anyone waiting for him. When he spotted his office door, he almost turned and walked the other way. 6 pretty young college students vying for his attention. He walked to the door and unlocked it, going into the office and sitting behind his desk before talking to the girls. It was always good to have a solid wooden object between him and the students. What can I help you girls with today? We were wondering what the #1 cause of death was on the Oregon Trail. I thought it was dysentery, but Amy says it was cholera. Amy knows more than anyone about anything, so I'm inclined to believe her, but I don't want to risk failing the exam because I don't know something so basic. It was only then that Aaron figured out where the girls had come from. They were in his Oregon Trail class, his favorite to teach, because it was truly his passion. He spent all of his time researching the trail except when he was in class or being thronged by girls during his office hours. It was definitely cholera. That's also why the Mormons died at a rate of 4.7% as opposed to the average of 3.5% for other pioneers. They didn't boil their water, because they didn't drink coffee. Thank you so much for the information, Dr. Christiansen. I don't think any one of us would have been able to sleep tonight if you hadn't solved our little dispute. Tell your friend Amy she was right. He reached for a bound journal on his desk of a preacher named Jedediah Scott who had married a young woman, Hannah Mosby, just before setting out on the trail. She'd been a stranger to him and they'd honeymooned on the Oregon Trail. I'm Amy, a young woman who had dark hair and glasses said from behind the girl who had been speaking. He looked at her for a moment, and realized she sat in the front row of his class 3 days a week, and he had no idea what her name was. You were right, Amy. Good job paying attention in class. Amy gave him a lovesick look that turned his stomach a little. Why were all these girls in his office anyway? I listened to every word you say. He wanted to groan out loud. Shouldn't you ladies be studying for finals? Monday is going to come awfully soon. Yes, of course, the first girl said. He had no idea what her name was, and all the other girls seemed to be there just to look at him. A paper bag over his head was sounding better by the moment. After the girls left, he ran his hand over his face. How was he supposed to get the girls to quit following him around and find a wife all at once? Ugh. Tenure was important to him, but even more important was the ability to work in peace. Could he find someone to marry him and then put her on a shelf in the corner of his spare room until he needed her for another party? It sounded smart to him. He booted up his computer to put some notes on the journal into a Word document, and he had an email from an old friend in Albuquerque. Dirk had married the previous spring, and he was deliriously happy. He was so happy that it made Aaron a little sick to his stomach at times. The email talked about his new bride and a hike they were going on. As he read the message, it occurred to Aaron that Dirk was as socially awkward as he was. He hadn't dated at all, and Aaron knew he was married. Maybe Dirk knew something he didn't. After reading through all of the glowing praises about Dirk's new wife, Aaron wrote out a quick response. How did you meet Alexis? It seems like you met her one day and married her the next. I need to meet someone and marry fast. I keep getting passed over for tenure. After he sent the email, he concentrated on typing out the notes about Jedediah and his wife. For some reason, they'd both left a journal, and he had access to both. Usually you could only find one journal for a family, if that. He hoped to get an even more complete picture of the trail by comparing the two journals. This was research gold. An hour later, he was still making his notes, when he noticed he'd gotten an email from Dirk. Don't tell anyone, but I met her through a matchmaker. The company is Matchrimony, and her name is Dr. Lachele Simpson. Contact her. She introduces people at the altar after some pretty serious interviews. She'll hook you up, and you won't even have to date. Aaron felt a slow smile spread across his face. Matrimony. It sounded stupid, but he'd give them a chance to find him a wife. Why not? Marissa didn't bother going to John's funeral. It would have made her a hypocrite, and that was one thing she was determined to never be. Being the butt of all the jokes in town was hard enough. She was working extra hours to make up for the days she hadn't worked at all after the car wreck. Her entire world had come crashing down around her. Of course, she'd missed a little work. As she was working on a Disney World itinerary for the Stevens family, she saw something on Facebook that surprised her. A friend was talking about how she'd been introduced to her husband at the altar. The idea was intriguing. She did a quick Google search for companies that would introduce people at the altar, and she only came up with one. Matrimony. Before she lost her courage, she dialed the number and made an appointment to go through the psychological testing the following weekend. Maybe she was making a mistake, but she was doing it with her eyes wide open. She wasn't going to stay in the same place dealing with the same problems for the rest of her life. Instead, she'd move to a new place and find new problems. Marissa was up early on Saturday, ready for Dr. Lachele. She felt like she was being interviewed, so she'd neatened up her house and had some snacks on hand. She had no idea what to expect from the other woman or the testing, so she made sure everything was company ready, as her mother would have said. She'd lived her entire life in this same small town in Arkansas, and her mother still had something to say if she left her house without her hair fixed properly. She never wore her pajamas to the store like some people she knew, but she didn't spend a lot of time on her hair, and she hated when someone snapped a picture of her with their phone and sent it to her mother. Marissa glanced at the clock and saw that Dr. Lachele was a few minutes late, so she sat down at her computer, thinking to get a little work in before she arrived. Apparently, the woman just jumped on a plane and went wherever people were interested in being married. It was strange to Marissa, but she certainly wouldn't mind that kind of travel. She'd only been working for a few minutes when she heard a loud sound from the direction of the parking lot. She hurried to her window and spotted a middle-aged woman with bright purple hair standing in front of a car that had a decent-sized dent on the front fender. It looked as if it had hit a small tree. She stared for a moment, not sure what to do. Finally, she walked outside to see if she could help. Are you all right? The woman nodded. Oh, yeah, sugar. That's my third tree this year. 3 trees, 4 mailboxes, and a partridge in a pear tree. Marissa just stood there. Well, I guess it's good you're not hitting other people. It is. The woman narrowed her eyes. You're not Marissa, are you? I am. Dr. Lachele? Oh, good grief. This crazy woman was the one there to administer a psychological test? Who had let her out of the asylum? The woman spread her arms. In the flesh. Now get over here and give me a booby bump. Booby bump? Oh, my goodness. Maybe she'd made a mistake. She walked to the other woman and hugged her carefully, almost afraid whatever was making the woman crazy was catching. Okay, girl, let me call the car rental agency, and then I'll be up. I always buy the insurance to cover me. Then my real insurance company doesn't need to know about these little fender benders. You go back inside, and I'll be right there. Marissa went back to her apartment obediently. She was more nervous than she had been. Oh, it was definitely a different kind of nervous now. She no longer worried the woman would judge her housekeeping skills, but would someone as crazy as her be able to spot normal? It was definitely something to think about. When Dr. Lachele joined her 10 minutes later, she was fanning her face with her hand. Spring in the south is so gold-on hot. I won't come in the summer, but the springs are almost as bad. Marissa smiled. You get used to it after a while. Can I get you something to drink? Water is fine for now. We need to get started. So much to cover so I can find you the perfect man. As soon as I saw you, I was pretty sure which man, but we'll see as the day goes on. Oh? Who do you have in mind? Marissa asked as she filled a glass with water for the older woman. I'm not telling you that. Dr. Lachele let out a laugh. It would ruin half my fun if you knew who you were marrying before the wedding. So, you enjoy torturing people? Marissa asked. Well, yeah. How do you think I got into this business? Dr. Lachele accepted the glass of water. Let's talk about you. Tell me about why you called me first. Marissa quickly related the events of her fiancé's death and her finding out he'd been cheating on her. Well, he sounds like a snake. And she sounds like a hussy. Are you willing to relocate if I find just the right man for you somewhere else? I want to relocate. This is the only place I've ever lived. I even did most of my university courses online. Dr. Lachele jotted something down on a notepad. Then it's time you spread your wings and fly. Now, let's talk about what you think you want in a man, and I'll let you know if you're right. Marissa no longer questioned what the older woman was thinking. It would be so much easier just to go with the flow. And if she could really find her someone to spend the rest of her life with who wouldn't cheat on her, well, she was sure she'd be happy. Tucking her legs under her, Marissa forgot she was being tested and fell into conversation mode. Dr. Lachele was someone she would enjoy having as an over-the-top, eccentric, wacky friend. She'd have to be sure to get to know her better. Chapter 2. Less than 6 weeks later, Marissa sat in the back of a church in Minnesota, more nervous than she'd ever remembered being. She was marrying a stranger, and the only person there to hold her hand was her best friend Janelle. Am I losing my mind? Marissa asked. Probably. I mean, who agrees to marry a stranger, sight unseen? It's a pretty crazy move, but I think it's one you need to make. So yes, you've lost your mind, but in the best way possible. Janelle had been extremely supportive as Marissa had gone through the loss of her fiancé, but more importantly, the mental anguish of knowing he'd been cheating on her. Marissa grinned at her friend. And now you know why I brought you along. She desperately needed at least one person to hold her hand and be her cheering section. What's your mother going to say when she finds out that you're married? Janelle knew that Marissa hadn't told her parents, for fear they would convince her not to go through with it. She'll be annoyed that I can't run her errands anymore. Marissa sighed. That's not fair. I just need to be away from that little town. As much as I love it, it was stifling me. And you think this place will be better? Janelle shrugged. Where are we anyway? Coon Rapids, Minnesota. It's a northern suburb of Minneapolis-St. Paul. And that's all I know about it. And you think your problems will magically disappear by leaving everyone you've ever loved and everything you've ever known? Marissa frowned. No, I really don't, but I think I'll get out of the rut I've been in for so long. She was sure there would be problems with moving in with a total stranger, but she was willing to try anything to change her life. Janelle nodded slowly. I sure hope you're right. And you'll FaceTime me every single week, right? On Wednesday evening at 7. That's when we always got together, so that's when we'll FaceTime now. I guess that'll work. Janelle shrugged. I still can't believe Jackson let me leave for 5 days, and he stayed home with the twins. They'd made a slow car trip of it, and they'd gotten there the previous evening. Janelle would take an Uber to the airport the following morning. I don't know if I'm ready for you to go home. Does Jackson have to have you back? Marissa would miss her friend a great deal. Janelle laughed. I'm not sure the twins are even still alive. As I was walking out the door, Jody yelled out, "Mommy! Who's going to feed us?" I laughed and Jackson mentioned McDonald's and all was fixed immediately. Marissa shook her head. "Those girls are rotten." She was their honorary aunt, so she knew them well. "They are. But I'm sure they're eating high on the M." "High on the M?" Marissa asked. "Well, I'd have said high on the hog, but we both know they're eating at the Golden Arches for every meal. It's not like Jackson is going to crack open a box of Kraft mac and cheese." Janelle rolled her eyes. "It's a good thing I'm a stay-at-home mom, because if he had to help with cooking or housework, we'd starve and be covered in trash." Marissa laughed softly. "They are living high on the M." She turned as the door opened. They'd been alone in there for an hour, so it was startling. "Dr. Lachele. How's my little bride-to-be?" Dr. Lachele asked, walking over and grabbing Marissa in a bear hug. "Introduce me to your friend, and tell her she has to booby bump. None of those weak hugs will do for me. Janelle, this is Dr. Lachele, the matchmaker who is setting up this whole thing." "Dr. Lachele, my best friend Janelle. And Janelle, you need to go in for a booby bump, please." Janelle looked a little stunned, but she did as she was told. Marissa realized that after spending hours with Dr. Lachele, she'd come to see her as a professional, and hadn't thought much more about her eccentricities. "Did the groom make it?" Marissa asked, trying to dispel her worst fear. She worried the groom wouldn't bother to show up for the wedding. "He's here. I came to see you first, but I saw his car outside. He's probably pacing a rut in the floor over in the other back room." "Well, go make sure it's really him, please. This is nerve-wracking enough." "Fine, I'll go check on him, but I promise, he's here. He's not the kind of man who wouldn't fulfill his obligations." Dr. Lachele headed for the door, nodding to Janelle on her way out. "It's your job to make sure the bride doesn't run away screaming into the night." "It's daytime," Janelle protested. "Well, don't let her run away screaming into the daylight then." Dr. Lachele closed the door firmly behind her, and Marissa grinned at Janelle. "Nuts, huh?" "In the very best way." Aaron sat in the room he'd been delegated to at the back of the church, reading another Oregon Trail journal. It seemed that everyone who had gone in one wagon train had kept journals, and he was determined to piece together a perfect picture of that particular group's journey. All of their good times, and all of the bad. He was taking notes on a pad of paper, when the door opened. He glanced over to see the crazy matchmaker he'd been hesitant to trust. Dr. Lachele. He had no idea why Dirk had said nice things about her. She seemed insane to him. "Hey there, Aaron. Your bride begged me to come in here and find out if you'd really made it or if you'd skipped town." "I didn't skip town. I'm here working." "Working?" Dr. Lachele frowned at him. "Why are you working just minutes before your wedding?" "Why is my wedding in the middle of my research project?" he retorted. He really hated that getting his tux and driving to the church had taken so much time away from his research. Whoever his bride was, he hoped he really could set her on a shelf in his spare room and only take her out as needed. She'd better not interfere with his work. Dr. Lachele shook her head. "I hope you'll give her the attention she requires as a wife." "Oh, sure. I will. Do you happen to know if she takes dictation?" He was too busy concentrating on his research to really even think about a bride. He hoped Dr. Lachele really had matched him with the right person, someone who wouldn't be frustrated with his constant need to work. Dr. Lachele shook her head. "That's not something I asked during the psychological testing. You do know you're going to have to talk to her. That you can't just ignore her when you don't want her around, right?" He shrugged, jotting down another bit about Mary Mitchell, the oldest daughter of Joseph and Caroline Mitchell. She was accompanying her parents on the Oregon Trail in the wagon train he'd been studying so intensely. "I guess." Really, he was blocking out her voice. It was a superpower he possessed. He could be in a room full of people and ignore them all with no problem. "I'll see you at the reception." Reception? Was I supposed to plan a reception? Those words came through for him loud and clear. Dr. Lachele shook her head. If you're trying to prove that the stereotype of an absent-minded professor is real, you're doing a great job. I planned the reception. I didn't want your bride to miss out because of your lack of forethought. Sounds good, Aaron said, happy to see her leave the room. Now he could write a few more notes about Mary and her relationship with her parents. The young girl was in charge of her younger siblings, all except the babe her mother was still nursing. It was a hard life to walk alongside the wagons and keep 6 children rounded up. Mary was also supposed to help them learn. Her father usually drove the wagon, but a few times her younger brother was given the task of driving the oxen. Mary had seemed bothered by it, but she understood her role as a girl in the 1850s, and she'd done as she was told. There was a knock on the door, and Aaron looked up, as always a little surprised to find himself in the 21st century and not the 1850s. It's time, the woman who had appeared told him. He wondered if he knew her, but he didn't care enough to think about it. All right. He wanted desperately to take the journal he was reading with him, but he knew it wasn't a good idea. No bride would be pleased to see her groom reading a historical journal as she walked up the aisle. He got to his feet and glanced in a mirror. His tux looked neat and wasn't all dusty. He didn't really care about anything else. Walking to the front of the church, he stood for what seemed like an inordinate amount of time beside the preacher. The church looked empty to him, but he remembered he'd forgotten to invite anyone but his department head. Bob needed to see that he was finally married. He'd even forgotten to invite his parents, but they'd understand and forgive him. He really was a bit of an absent-minded professor as long as he wasn't trying to remember historical facts, those he had down to a science. He was staring straight ahead when his bride started down the aisle, and he was a little stunned by how pretty she was. Why would a pretty woman marry a stranger? It didn't really make sense to him. But then he thought about some of the marriages that happened on the trail. Women would lose their husbands and marry strangers all the time. Or, well, just about anything could happen. He took the hand she offered him and turned with her to face the pastor. He hadn't caught her name, but he decided it didn't matter too terribly much. Maybe he could just call her wife? Nah, the pastor would give her name. He hoped. Marissa Lachele, do you take this man, Aaron Christiansen, to be your lawfully wedded husband? To love, honor, and cherish as long as you both shall live? Or until one of us files for divorce? Marissa nodded, worried about how good-looking the man she was marrying was. Good-looking men tended to be players, in her opinion. She hoped she wasn't attaching herself to a player. I do. When the pastor pronounced them man and wife, she froze for a second. They were supposed to kiss, and he was a stranger. This was much more awkward than she'd thought it would be. She turned to Aaron and lifted her lips for his kiss. Aaron wondered if kissing her was the right thing to do, but Bob was watching, and he had no choice. He leaned down and gently brushed her lips with his, quickly straightening. The two of them turned together and looked at the 5 or 6 people there. Marissa wondered if he was from another part of the country as well, but if he was, why did he want to get married there? It didn't really make sense to her. With her hand tucked into his arm, the two of them walked back down the aisle and went into a small room at the back of the church. She had no idea where he was taking her, but she assumed it was somewhere to talk. Instead, as soon as she let go of his arm, he walked to a file full of papers and sat down, picking up a notebook. He jotted something down, and then started reading. You don't want to talk? Marissa asked, wondering what kind of man Dr. Lachele had found for her. He seemed, disinterested was too mild of a word. Uncaring? He glanced up at her. Oh, yes, of course. I'm sorry, I was engaged in research when I was told it was time for the ceremony, and I needed to jot down some notes about something I'd just read before I forgot. He hoped she'd believe him. He really didn't want to offend his brand new wife, whom he'd just met. I see. Marissa frowned at him for a moment. What kind of research? I'm a history professor at a local college. I specialize in the Oregon Trail. Aaron hoped she wasn't at all interested. It would be so much easier to keep her in her place that way. Really? I know very little about the Oregon Trail. I mean, I know what it is, of course, but I couldn't even give you the years it was active. He smiled. Don't worry about it. It's not something you need to know. He shrugged. Now, we should probably go out to the reception, right? Marissa shook her head. I thought it would be good if we spent a little while getting to know each other first. 5 or 10 minutes should be enough, but all I know about you is that your name is Aaron. I guess we can do that. As I said, I'm a history professor at a local college. I grew up in Burnsville, which is about a 45-minute drive from here. It's on the south side of Minneapolis. I live in an apartment near the college where I work. He did have a spare room, though, which he almost told her would be hers. It might be better to wait and tell her that later, though. What about you? I'm a Disney travel agent. I plan out entire itineraries for families who plan to go to Disney World, meals, resort, everything. I make sure they're in all the parks and having fun. That's a job, he asked, a little flummoxed. Why wouldn't people just plan their own vacation? Why pay someone else when you were already paying through the nose to go to a giant tourist trap anyway? She frowned. It is a job, and it's one I love. She walked over and sat down beside him. Why did you decide to go to Dr. Lachele? He shrugged. It was the only way I knew of to get married without having to put a lot of time into courting someone. So, you didn't really want to marry? Marissa had no idea what she was doing married to the man, but she really hoped Dr. Lachele hadn't made a huge mistake. I wanted to be married. I didn't want to have to figure out how to get there. Now I'm married, so all is good. Most people enjoy dating. Aaron blinked a few times. Most people are crazy then. He didn't want to offend her though. Where are you from? That accent doesn't say Minnesota. I don't have an accent. You do. I'm from Arkansas, but Dr. Lachele told me I'd be moving here with you, since my job is mobile, and yours isn't. Marissa wasn't going to let the topic go. Why did you want to be married? Oh, there's no way I'll get tenure until I marry. I know it's silly and old-fashioned, but my female students follow me around campus, and they cause problems. We're hoping when they learn of my marriage, they'll leave me alone. Marissa felt her heart sink. I'm not sure me marrying you is a good idea. We signed a contract, remember? Aaron clung to the hope she wouldn't be willing to back out of the contract and pay a great deal of money. She sighed. We did, didn't we? I really think Dr. Lachele made a mistake with the two of us. I want romance. I want a husband who will sweep me off my feet and make me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Well, I do find you quite beautiful if that helps. Aaron was not a romantic man. He had never even cared to be a romantic man. He'd rarely dated, because he was always so much more interested in research than in the girls he knew. I guess it helps a little. Marissa had no idea what she was supposed to do with this man. None at all. Well, let's go to the reception. Dr. Lachele said she planned one. Why are there so few people here? Didn't you have people you wanted to come to the wedding? She asked softly. It was the last thing she'd ask, but it was something she really wanted to know. He sighed. Honestly? I forgot to invite people. My boss is here, so he could know I was married. I didn't think to ask anyone else. Not even your parents? She asked, shocked. The man was different than she'd expected. I'm sorry. I didn't even think to invite them. He knew it was weird, but it was just how he was. A big wedding wasn't something he'd ever wanted. He would have preferred standing in front of a justice of the peace, but Dr. Lachele had insisted his bride would want a wedding. Marissa nodded. All right. Let's go out to the reception. Oh, it's here in the building? He asked, surprised. Dr. Lachele told me it was. She got to her feet and headed for the door, wanting to be anywhere in the world but in a room alone with him. Sure, he was handsome, but he was a basket case as far as she was concerned. Dr. Lachele was about to get a piece of her mind. Aaron got up and followed her from the room, not surprised that she went straight to Dr. Lachele. He followed her, not wanting anything said behind his back. He realized quickly that was a mistake. "You have lost your mind," Marissa said loudly. "Why would you match me up with a man who doesn't even know what century he lives in, let alone that he has a wife? He forgot to invite people to his wedding. He didn't even invite his parents." "Are your parents here?" Dr. Lachele asked. "Well, no, but you know why they're not here. He just forgot. Well, I didn't promise you a man who was perfect when you signed up. I promised you the man who was right for you. It may not seem like it now, but that man is just right for you in every way." Marissa rolled her eyes. "I think you've lost your mind." "Maybe I have. Time will tell." Chapter 3. After the short reception, Marissa followed Aaron back to his apartment, still in her wedding dress. When they arrived, she realized just how beautiful the campus and the area where he lived were. The Mississippi River ran right behind the college. She parked and got out of the car, looking back at him. "Let's go walk down by the river." "Seriously?" he asked. "I was planning on doing some research." He hoped she wouldn't always insist on taking up his time. She shook her head. "I'll go alone then. I was just thinking we could get some pictures to commemorate our wedding day." No big deal, though. It wasn't a big deal because their marriage wouldn't last longer than the contract, which was in place for 1 year. As soon as her year was up, she was out of there. It served her right for letting a crazy woman match her up with a stranger, though. "No, wait. I'll go with you." He didn't want to, but he could tell it was important to her. He watched as her face lit up, and she lifted her skirt just enough so she could walk quickly and comfortably. As they walked past the campus, he pointed out the window to his office. "I'll remember that," she told him, and she knew she would. She had a sense of direction like few people she'd ever met. She could go back anywhere after only being there once. Just glancing at a map had her able to make a 1,000-plus-mile drive with no atlas or GPS. He smiled. "The next time I forget my lunch, we'll test that." "I could bring you lunch anytime," she said softly. She genuinely enjoyed cooking, but cooking for one was never fun. Her favorite thing about her engagement to John was being able to cook for two instead of just one. She hoped that he would take her up on it, but it would mean her going into his workspace, and she wasn't sure he'd let her. "You cook?" he asked. He usually just got food delivered. Pizza, Chinese, or Grubhub. It would be nice not to have to think about ordering and just eating when food magically appeared in front of him. It was going to be good to have a wife in more ways than he'd realized. "I do," she said. "I enjoy whipping up meals when I get a chance. I hated cooking for just one, though." She almost added that was the worst thing about her engagement being over, but she wasn't ready to get into that with the absent-minded professor. Someday she'd share her story with him, but she was sure he didn't care at the moment. When she reached the edge of the water, she noticed a rope hanging from one of the trees. She was sure many kids had swung on that rope over the years, and she wished she'd taken the time to change so she could swing on it now. But even she wouldn't do something so silly in her wedding dress. "Hold still, and I'll get your picture there," Aaron said, finding that he wanted to remember her just as she was at that very moment. In a few weeks, she'd be sick of him and the way he ignored her, but just then? She had a slight smile on her face as she discovered the wonders of Minnesota. Marissa smiled at him over her shoulder and moved along the shoreline for a moment, knowing he was taking pictures of her. She didn't mind. They would be special, something they could show their grandkids someday. Well, if they were going to be married for longer than a year, they could. "Now you. I want pictures of you from today." And she found she did. The man was handsome. He was the kind of man you looked at once, and you felt like you'd been punched in the gut, and you had a hard time making coherent conversation. She was sure all the girls did just as he said and followed him around. As she snapped some pictures of him, someone came up behind her. "Would you like me to take a photo of the two of you together?" a young woman's voice asked. "That would be great." Marissa handed the girl her phone and went over to stand with Aaron. He wrapped his arm around her waist, and she rested her head on his shoulder. She was certain they looked like a recently married couple who were very much in love. Good. She wanted something good from the day. Thank you, Marissa called as she walked to get her phone back. Dr. Christiansen? The girl asked, looking a little stunned. Yes. Were you in one of my classes? The girl sighed. I'm in 2 of your classes this summer. I was in 2 of your classes during the spring semester as well. How's your research coming? Aaron's face lit up at the question. I found a journal of a young woman named Mary. She went west with her family and... Marissa tuned him out as he talked to his student. His face was so animated as he talked about history, and so, well, almost bored looking when he talked about marriage. What was wrong with the man? He had no interest in his own life, but he was fascinated with people who had lived 150 years before. It was downright strange in her opinion. She kept exploring, leaving Aaron still talking about Mary. He really seemed to feel like the girl was alive as he talked about her. How strange. Perhaps the key to having a happy marriage with the absent-minded professor was to learn to be interested in the Oregon Trail. Was it even possible? Perhaps she could read a book or 2 from his library, she hadn't seen it yet, but she was sure it existed, and force herself to be interested. She'd never been a huge history buff, but she did have a lifelong love of learning. She'd liked Little House on the Prairie reruns. It couldn't be too far off from that, could it? She'd try. She'd read through some of his research material while he was at work and jot down questions to ask. It was pretty obvious he'd never be interested in Disney World and all the intricacies that were involved in planning the perfect vacation. Finally, she heard footsteps behind her, and Aaron caught her arm, spinning her around. Please don't ever leave me alone with a student again. That's the reason I married, to avoid any appearance of impropriety. So, you married me to protect you from your students. And to get tenure, he said. Marissa nodded. How could I forget your need for tenure? She found the man utterly infuriating. Even a walk along the shore of the Mississippi River was ridiculous with him. I think I'll go and unpack my things. Oh, she wanted to tell him to stuff their marriage certificate where the sun didn't shine, but she didn't dare. She had to stay with him for an entire year. It would be the longest year of her life. When they got back to the apartment, Aaron carried Marissa's things inside and showed her the bedroom that would be hers as long as she was there, and then he wandered off to do some more research. Marissa knew she should be fuming that he was putting her in a bedroom other than his own, but she couldn't force herself to care. She didn't want him touching her anyway. The man was ridiculous, and she had no desire to spend time with him. Instead of immediately unpacking, Marissa changed into a pair of shorts and a t-shirt and wandered around, familiarizing herself with the place. It was 3 bedrooms, and there were thankfully 2 full baths. The kitchen was small, but still bigger than the one she'd had back in Arkansas. She was going to enjoy cooking in it. One bedroom was an office, and he was sitting there with a journal open, taking rapid notes onto a tablet. There was a computer, and the walls were lined with books. One was obviously a master bedroom, but it looked as if it was slept in and nothing more. The man obviously lived for his work and nothing else. She felt bad for him that he cared about nothing in the current century. The 3rd bedroom was hers. There was a full-sized bed, a dresser, a nightstand, and there was a bathroom that connected to the bedroom and the office. Lovely, she didn't even want to share a bathroom with him while he worked. The man was way too into his research. It had only taken her a few minutes to figure that out. She quickly unpacked her clothes and personal items, and then she went down to the car and carried a couple of more boxes into the building and up the flight of stairs. She had no desire to live on the 2nd floor, having always preferred a 1st-floor apartment, but she was relatively sure the man cared nothing about her preferences. She unpacked the boxes with her crock pot and Instant Pot, looking into the refrigerator. There was no food. A few bottles of water was all he had on hand. Instead of asking him, she pulled out her phone and found a grocery store nearby, glad she'd decided to make the drive from Arkansas. She had her own set of wheels, and she could be self-sufficient while he ignored everything she did. She wanted to kick him, but realized it was childish, more childish than him ignoring her on their wedding day. The grocery trip took a little over an hour, because she was starting from scratch. The man didn't even own a bottle of ketchup. Once she was back at the apartment, she threw together a quick casserole for supper. She wanted to be petty and just cook for one, but instead she cooked a meal for both of them, going to the door of his office. "Aaron, supper's ready." She forced a smile to her face, trying to be a good wife, even though he obviously didn't even know what a good husband was. He looked up, seeming confused. "Supper? I don't have any food in the apartment." Marissa shook her head. The man was unbelievable. "I left and picked up some groceries." "You left?" Aaron was confused for a moment. Hadn't it just been 15 minutes since he carried her suitcases up? He glanced at his watch and realized it had been 4 hours. "I'm sorry, I abandoned you to unpack. I didn't realize how much time had passed." He'd intended to just read and make notes on a few more pages, then help her with what she was doing. Marissa felt slightly appeased by his apology. "I got what I needed to do done. Come eat. It's just a simple casserole, but I think you'll like it. It's food. I'm not picky, I'm sure I'll prefer it to take out." He was glad he'd had his housekeeper come in and clean that morning. She was someone he'd found through a friend at work, and she did a great job keeping things clean, and better yet, she was old enough to be his mother and very happily married. He stood up, stretching as he realized how stiff he was. "I really didn't mean to spend so much time on research today." He'd had good intentions, but he always did. He just wasn't good on following through on anything but his research. "I had a lot to do, and I kept myself occupied." Marissa led him into the small dining area, where she'd set the table. Where did those dishes come from? He had been eating off only paper plates since he'd moved out of his parents' house. "I brought them." How can a grown man not have a single dish in his apartment? She had been shocked when she'd realized. He was living like he was in a dorm room, not like he was a grown, functioning adult. He shrugged. "I wouldn't remember to wash them, and it's easier for my housekeeper to just throw them all away." "Housekeeper?" she asked. Marissa loved the idea of a housekeeper. She definitely didn't want to have to clean up after a man who would forget to do the dishes. "She comes every Saturday morning. If you don't want to keep using her, feel free to let her go. I've been using her since about a month after I started teaching here." "No, I'm thrilled to have a housekeeper. I work long weeks and cleaning up on the weekend is not something I like the idea of." "What all does she do?" He looked confused for a moment. "Everything. I order takeout for every meal, and she makes sure the containers are gone. My clothes get magically washed. I tend to go to the office and just let her do her thing, and it's clean when I get back." Marissa blinked for a moment. He was worse than she'd imagined. The man was an utter train wreck. Why had she married him again? She couldn't wait to be alone so she could call Dr. Lachele to find out what the crazy woman was thinking. As they ate, she managed to engage Aaron in conversation. "When are you planning to tell your parents you married?" she asked. She didn't mention that she hadn't told her own parents yet. He shrugged. "I guess I can call them after supper. I'm an adult, though. They're not going to worry about it." "I don't think they'll worry, but it would be nice if they at least knew. Parents like to be included in their children's lives." "Were your parents at the wedding?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. He hadn't been introduced to them if they had been there. "No, they would have stopped me. They wanted me to stay in the same little town in Arkansas for the rest of my life. I did introduce you to my best friend, though." "I think I remember her," he lied. He didn't. He didn't remember much about the reception, because his mind had been on Mary and her journey across the country by foot. "No, you don't. Your mind was on something far away when I introduced you." "What was her name?" Marissa asked, shaking her head at him. "Mary?" "No, her name was Janelle." "Who's Mary?" He sighed. "You caught me. Mary is the young woman whose journal I'm reading. She kept a careful journal of the Oregon Trail, and I'm reading all about it. It's fascinating. What is so fascinating about it? Well, she's the oldest child of 8, and she traveled with her entire family. It was her job to keep her 6 younger siblings in line, and to teach them as they walked across the plains. She was 20 at the beginning of the journey, which was old enough to be considered a spinster. More than anything, she was an indentured servant to her parents on the journey. What's really interesting to me is that she realized she could get her own homestead once they reached Oregon, and she planned to file for her own plot of land. It's right there in the journal. Most women never would have dreamed of such a thing, but Mary did. So even at 20, she wasn't old enough to be on her own? She had to go with her parents? Pretty much. Aaron shrugged. I taught about how little control women had over their lives last week, and one girl in the front row very eloquently told everyone how she felt about it. She yelled out, "That sucks," right in the middle of my lecture. And she was right. Women's lives in the 19th century were difficult, and they were unable to vote or hold land back east. Their lives really did suck. "And you're reading Mary's journal right now?" she asked. She had gone to an online college, and she had a degree, but she certainly didn't have a doctorate. Her new husband made her feel stupid. "I am. And I'm more than reading it. I'm studying it. I'm noting how far she said she went every day and comparing it to how far the others in the same wagon train said they went. It's fascinating. I'm, for the first time in my career, studying an entire wagon train, reading journals from every single wagon in the group of 22 wagons. I've never found such a complete record before, but when I put all these journals together, I realized they were from the same group." "Does that mean that you'll get more information?" she asked. "More? Not really. More complete, yes. That's what I've been looking for, and why I'm so excited about this particular group of journals. I'm reading them one after the other. By the time I'm done, I could write an entire series of books with details about this particular party." "I love it." Marissa smiled. "That really does sound like it could be fun. Do you enjoy writing?" "I really don't know. I enjoy writing historical articles that are usually published in university magazines, and I've tried my hand at a complete Oregon Trail book. I've never just tried to write fiction, though. Maybe I'll borrow your journals, and I'll write a series of novels on it." "That could really be fun." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "Do you write?" She hadn't seemed to be the type to him, but he'd certainly respect her more if she did write. It mattered to him to be around thinking people. She shrugged. "I did some creative writing in high school and college." "College?" he asked, a little excited. "Do you have your degree?" "Yes, but it's just in liberal arts. My mom didn't think it was a good idea for me to drive to the nearest college, because it would have been an hour each way, so I had to settle for an online degree." "Liberal arts?" he asked. "Do you want fries with that?" His own degree was in history, so he didn't have much room to talk. He loved liberal arts degree jokes. She made a face. "I've heard all the jokes. Heck, I've made all the jokes. But I happen to love what I do, and I couldn't do it without my silly liberal arts degree. You could take some classes at the college, if you felt like it. I could get you in at a quarter the usual rate." She shrugged. "Maybe I'll do that. I'll think on it. I don't really have time to go to school while I work." "I guess not. You decide, and I'll support your decision, no matter what it is." "Thanks." She was surprised he was being so good to her all of a sudden. "Call your parents after supper and tell them we're married. If they're anything like my parents, they're going to insist we drive there to see them tomorrow, so they can meet me." "When are you telling your parents?" he asked. "Tonight. I'm going to call them. They're going to be disappointed to lose their errand runner." He frowned at that. "What's an errand runner?" "They thought I should run all their errands since I was home all day anyway. They never quite got that I was working all those hours and not sitting around eating bonbons." "Do you even like bonbons?" he asked. "No, but I never turn down a piece of Dove chocolate." "I will keep that in mind." Aaron took another bite of his food. "This is really good. I don't suppose there's more?" Marissa nodded. There is. It's nice to not have to cook for one anymore. You can feed me anytime. Chapter 4. As soon as she'd put the dishes in the dishwasher, Marissa sat down in the living room and called her mother. She knew her mom wouldn't like it, but she had to get the conversation over and done with. She preferred to procrastinate difficult discussions, but they always weighed on her mind until she had them. Hello? Hey, Mom. How are things? Marissa asked. She wanted to try to sound casual. Maybe some idle chit-chat should start her day. Busy. When are you going to be home? Her mother got straight to the point as always. Actually, I'm not. I got married today. Marissa held her breath as she waited for the explosion. She didn't have to wait long. You got married? Who did you marry? Her mother sounded absolutely shocked at the news. A really nice professor. And no one has ever been so clueless about what's going on around him. You'll like him. His name is Aaron. Marissa realized she'd never been as far away from her mother as she was at that moment. Mom tended to worry when she wasn't close. Where does he live? Minnesota. He's a history professor, and he's studying the Oregon Trail. When he talks about it, I find history fascinating. Okay, maybe that was a stretch, but as usual, her mother was being overprotective. Marissa had to convince her everything was all right. Is that so? Yes, it is. I'll send you a card with my address soon. Marissa refused to feel guilty about getting married. Maybe she should have told her mother before she'd left town, but it was all over with now. Did you know you were marrying him before you left? Or do I need to go pack up your apartment? Everything is packed and gone. Janelle is going to sell my furniture for me, isn't that nice? Her mother sighed heavily. You could have told me. And there was the first indication her mother was feeling left out. I probably should have, but I didn't want you to talk me out of it. He's a good man, Mom, and I need to start over. I tried to tell you that after John died, and you wouldn't listen. Marissa knew her actions would seem crazy, but her mother would just have to deal with it. I guess I wouldn't. Send me that card, and I'll call you in a few days. Marissa knew that meant her mother would take a couple of days to get over not being told first, and then all would be well again. Sounds good. Love you, Mom. I love you too. Marissa looked up as Aaron walked into the room. I called my mom, and you were right. They want us to come over tomorrow evening for supper. Are you up for meeting your in-laws? He rubbed the back of his neck as he asked the question, obviously having had a hard time explaining to his mother he was married. Marissa nodded. Absolutely. Tell me about your parents. Aaron sat down beside Marissa and shrugged. Their parents. Dad is an OB/GYN, and he's always busy delivering someone's baby. Mom was a stay-at-home mother and always made sure the house was perfectly clean and there was a snack waiting for me when I got out of school. They both liked the idea of me becoming a professor, because they watched me get super involved in history even as a teenager. Any brothers or sisters? She asked. Nope. Just me. Mom has been hinting that she wants grandkids, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention that we're not sleeping together. If you don't mind, that is. I don't mind. It's not something I'd really feel comfortable talking to my mother-in-law about anyway. I'm glad. It's none of her business. Aaron looked over at Marissa. Do you want to do something together? He wasn't sure what they could do, but he'd be happy to spend time with her doing things. She was surprised, but she could tell the offer was hard for him. Like what? We could watch a show. Do a puzzle. Maybe play the Oregon Trail game. I have the original card game. No way. I'm not dying of dysentery. He laughed. Do you realize that cholera was the biggest killer on the trail and not dysentery? So many people believe that silly game and that 75% of people on the trail died of dysentery. It was more like 5% of people who died from all causes on the trail. I had no idea. I thought people really were keeling over right and left from dysentery. He shook his head. Not at all. Cholera was huge though, and killed more of the pioneers than anything else. The best estimate I've seen is about 21,000 people died on the trail altogether. So, if you were in a family of 10, 2 would expect to die along the trail. It was a long, hard journey, and people did die. Just not as many as the games make it seem like. Well, that's good to know, I guess. I'm like 8th generation Arkansasan, so I know my ancestors didn't go over the Oregon Trail. He laughed. I don't think any of mine did either, and I have looked and looked. Tell me about Mary, she said. His whole face lit up at her words, and he talked about many of Mary's feelings about the trail and how nervous her mother had been with so many children. The women realized rightly that the Oregon Trail and even settling out west meant more work for them. The men just had dollar signs in their eyes. They wanted a better income for their families. Did the women realize the danger involved in the journey? Definitely. Most were afraid of Native Americans, or Indians as they were called then. But that wasn't the biggest threat on the trail. It was a minor threat when compared with wagon accidents, drownings, and cholera. The biggest killer was cholera. I don't even know what cholera is. He smiled and explained, and they talked late into the night. Erin was surprised at how much he enjoyed teaching her about his favorite subject and how interested she seemed. It was just after midnight, when he realized the time. I had no idea it was so late. I enjoyed talking to you. He rarely was able to talk to anyone for an extended period, and he was thrilled she'd made things so easy for him. Marissa nodded. Thanks for answering all of my questions. I must seem stupid to you, but I never learned any of those things in American history. It's a period of time that's glossed over. For instance, you've heard of the Pony Express? At her nod, he asked. Do you have any idea how long the Pony Express was active? 50 years, she asked. She honestly had no clue, but she'd heard the words often enough that she was certain it was active for a long time. 18 months. Months? Are you serious? She asked, utterly shocked by his statement. Yup. It was only 18 months from the time it started until it stopped. And the riders were always preteen boys. They would actually advertise for orphans, because if the boy died, they didn't want the family being angry. I had no idea. Most people don't. There are really interesting stories from the Old West. A lot of American history is just brushed under the table, because no one wants to admit our country was once as bad as many others. What we did to the Native Americans was nothing short of genocide, and people watch cowboy and Indian movies, and they think they know what really happened. We stole their land, and we killed them, forcing them onto reservations. She nodded. I think people are becoming a lot more aware of that as a whole, but they still think the Native Americans were the bad guys. It makes me really sad. Me too. He got to his feet and held his hand down for her. Maybe having a wife won't be terrible after all. Marissa shook her head. You make me feel so good about myself. Hey, you're the prettiest wife I've ever had. She laughed. I am guessing you've never married. No one would have married him if they hadn't been tricked into it. She still wasn't certain what Dr. Lachele had been thinking, matching the two of them up. Or matching him up to anyone for that matter. Yup. You're the first. Don't you feel special now? He walked her to the door of her bedroom. May I kiss you goodnight? He wasn't sure where the words had come from, but he wanted nothing more than a kiss from her. Hopefully she'd agree and not leave him standing there feeling like an absolute idiot. I'd like that, she answered honestly. At least she now knew that her initial fear upon seeing him was not true. He wasn't a player. He had barely looked at her. Erin smiled and leaned down, gently touching his lips to hers. When she moved closer and deepened the kiss, he was a little surprised, but pleased. His hands went to her waist and he pulled her even closer to him, feeling his body come alive at her touch. After a minute, he lifted his head. Whoa. You pack a punch, lady. Good. I want you to think about that tonight. Dream of me and not of Mary. She went into her room and closed her door behind her, completely out of breath. If he'd kissed her for much longer, she'd have been begging him to make love to her. Instead, she was going to bed alone, to reflect on her wedding day. She was married to a crazy man who lived in the 19th century. And she didn't mind even a little bit. Marissa was up early the following morning, finding that sleeping in an unfamiliar bed was harder than she thought it would be. She took a quick shower before going to the kitchen to make breakfast. She wasn't sure if the professor was up yet, but if he wasn't, she'd wake him. He needed breakfast, whether he liked it or not. She put together 2 ham and cheese omelets, and set the table, adding buttered toast and putting a jar of raspberry jam on the table. She'd noticed a coffee pot and made a big pot of coffee for them. When it all looked just perfect, she went to the study and peeked in. Sure enough, he was poring over one of his journals and taking notes by hand. "I made breakfast," she told him, opening the door so the smells would waft into the study. He got to his feet and followed her out into the dining room. "Are you always going to feed me?" he asked. Marissa shrugged. "Unless you annoy me too much." She took her seat and waited to start eating until he'd taken his. "Do you usually go to church on Sundays?" she asked. He shrugged. "When I remember, I do. I'm a member of the church where we got married. The late service is at 11, and we could go if you wanted, but I think we're entitled to a weekend without." She grinned. Maybe a weekend without wouldn't be so bad. She spread the jam over her toast and took a bite. She knew how to get him to talk now. "If we were on the trail, what would we be eating for breakfast?" He answered quickly, between bites of breakfast. "You're a good cook," he said, seeming to be surprised. "I wonder if you'd have been able to cook such wonderful meals over a campfire." "I don't know, to be honest. My mother always cooked when we went camping, and she never let me try. Not that I tried to force it. I loved hiking and fishing, so that's what I'd do while she made meals." "That sounds fun to me." He explained the traditional roles people had on the trail, and she listened raptly. The more he talked about the subject, the more interested she became. She had to wonder if he'd have done as well with a woman he couldn't interest in history. After breakfast, he told her they'd want to leave around 3 for his parents' house. "Mom likes guests there by 4, so there's time to socialize before supper." "That works for me. Is there a place for me to set up my computer? I already took some time off to pack up my house and come here. I'm going to need to get back to work tomorrow." He pursed his lips. "I have an extra desk in my study, or you could use the desk in your room." He wasn't sure which he wanted her to choose. If she worked in her room, she wouldn't disturb him as much, but he found he was enjoying her company, which was a complete surprise. "Would you mind sharing your study?" she asked. She usually worked in pajamas unless she had errands to run, but if he didn't mind, then she didn't. "I wouldn't mind. I'll clean out the drawers after we finish up here." He had no idea what was in the drawers of that other desk. Probably Oregon Trail journals. That's what was piled everywhere else. "I'll clean the kitchen while you do that, and then I'll get everything set up. I'm not great with computers, but I could help if you needed me to." "No, thanks," Marissa responded. "I've been setting up my own computers for a long time. I don't mind." True to his word, she heard him banging around in the study while she loaded the dishwasher and ran it. When the kitchen was as clean as it had been the previous day when she'd arrived, she walked into the study to see what he was doing. He had piled a big stack of pamphlets on the floor, and he was clearing out yet another drawer. "I don't need a ton of space," she told him. "I use a laptop for work." It would be nice to have the entire desk to herself, but she wasn't sure he could make that happen. "Okay. I still want you to have use of the desk. You should be able to put things in the drawers without dodging all of my journals." He should have thought to clean out the desk before she arrived. She smiled, leaning against the doorjamb and watching him work. She found she liked it when his t-shirt pulled tightly over his shoulders. He was very sexy in a nerdy kind of way. When he'd finished, she got her laptop from her room and set it up, getting the Wi-Fi password from him. "So, how's Mary today?" "I'm done with Mary's journal." I was surprised with how it ended, but I shouldn't have been. Perhaps you'd like to borrow it? I don't want to spoil what happened for you. Marissa grinned. I would love to borrow it. It was hard to believe that less than 24 hours before she'd been planning to force herself to read some of the journals, and now she was interested enough that she was looking forward to it. Today I'm reading about Malcolm Bentley. He was a doctor on the trail, and the only one in the wagon train he joined. So, he's being called on any time someone gets sick. They have only been out of Independence, Missouri for a day, and he's already been called to deal with a young man shooting himself in the foot. She laughed. Did accidents like that happen often? All too often, Aaron told her. People were as careless then as they are now. She took the little pamphlet he offered her and began reading about Mary. She found that Mary wrote about the journey, but she also wrote about her hopes and dreams and what it was like on a wagon train. Fascinating. Chapter 5. By lunchtime, Marissa was completely engrossed in the journal and didn't want to put it down until it was done. She didn't even think about food until Aaron mentioned he was hungry. I can go pick something up? Or do you want to make something? I don't want to take my eyes off the page. Would you mind picking something up? She asked. He got to his feet. What sounds good? We have Chipotle's, Potbelly, Culver's, Wendy's, Arby's, and Chick-fil-A off the top of my head. Would you do Chipotle's? I have the app. I'd never had them until the trip up here, and I love how I can choose exactly what's in my burrito bowl. There's an app? He asked. Yup. Let me order for us. It'll be ready when you get there, and I'll even pay for it in advance. I'll give you the cash, he said, feeling the need to pay. Don't worry about it. Joint money now and all that. She pulled up the app and quickly ordered her burrito bowl. What do you want? He gave her his order and she tapped it into her phone. Do you want to go with me to pick it up? He asked. She shook her head. Nope. I want to read my journal. Aaron was pretty sure he'd created a monster as he headed for the door. He'd had visions of his wife always going out to get meals for them. But nope. She was reading Oregon Trail journals, and he was fetching the food. Somehow the roles he'd expected them to have had been flipped on their heads. He wasn't sure how he was going to manage, but he'd have to put on a brave face. He grabbed the food and took it home, finding she was right and it was extremely easy to do it that way. Maybe having a wife wasn't the worst thing in the world. They ate at the table, and she put the journal down and left it on her desk. I don't want to ruin it. Good move. The books in that room are worth a great deal of money. I had a feeling that was the case. Why is there no map of the trail up on the wall in the study? How am I supposed to understand exactly where the trail went? She really would have expected him to have a map, so he could follow along as he read the journals. I have a map in my classroom at the university. I guess we could go over there and look at it if you really needed to. Need? She asked. Probably not. It hasn't quite reached that level yet. But tell me when you have time for lunch tomorrow, and I'll bring food to your office and then you can show me the map. See how accommodating I am? Aaron narrowed his eyes at her. You're not going to let me put you on a shelf, are you? Marissa blinked. Put me on a shelf? He sighed. When I first decided to contact Dr. Lachele, I decided what I really needed was a wife I could put on a shelf in the spare bedroom, and I could just get her down for departmental parties. It would have been perfect. That's not even worth a response, you know. I know. He shook his head. I guess I wasn't really expecting a living, breathing wife though, which is ridiculous. You wanted a robot? Or a Stepford wife? Or are those things the same? I never really saw the movie, and I get confused sometimes. I never saw it either. Maybe we should watch it together sometime. Not until I'm done with Mary's journal. He shook his head. We're going to need to leave for Burnsville in an hour or so. She looked startled for a moment. Do I need to change? Will they expect me to be dressed up? He shrugged. I don't care if you change or not, but Mom will be in a dress, and Dad will be in a suit. That's just how they roll. Oh, great. Marissa frowned. I'll make it work. As soon as she'd thrown away the trash from their meal, she hurried into her room and found a dress. She wasn't sure it was the right thing to wear, but it was the only dress she had if you didn't count her wedding dress. She changed, fixed her hair, and applied makeup. When she walked into the living room, Aaron was waiting for her, wearing a suit and tie. Do you always dress like that when you're going to see your parents? He shrugged. Only if I'm going for supper. They've always dressed for supper, for some absurd reason. So, I go along with it. Your parents don't have maids, do they? Just one is live-in. Why? Marissa felt like she was in way over her head, and she turned to go back to her room and hide. Aaron caught her arm as she headed away from him. Where are you going? I'm not ready to meet your parents or their servants. Call and tell them I have the bubonic plague, and I'll be ready to meet them in about 6 years. Since they probably wouldn't be married in a year, it seemed like the perfect plan. Until he left, that was. You're going. You made me call them last night and tell them I'd married, so now you get to meet them today. That's how life works. The next time you don't want to meet your husband's parents, don't make him call them. He kept his hand on her arm. Do you need a purse? Of course, I need a purse. It's in my room. You'll have to let go. I'll go to your room with you. You won't melt if you step foot in my room? She asked, making a sweet face. I'll do my best. You are my wife after all. I think I should be able to step foot in your room with nothing untoward happening. Untoward? You really do live in another century, don't you? She walked to her room, well aware that he was just a step behind her the entire way. She picked up her purse from the dresser and put it over her arm. I hope your mother isn't against Mickey Mouse purses. He looked at the cartoon characters on the side of her purse and grinned. You really do eat and sleep Disney, don't you? It's one of the perks of the job. She wanted to find a more adult purse, but what was wrong with letting her Disney flag fly? In the car, she asked him about the journal he was working on. So, the doctor you're reading about, did he go on the trail during the same year as Mary? Would they have known one another? He laughed. They were on the same wagon train, so yes, they knew each other. They're both part of that set of journals that tells me something about each wagon in the group. The doctor she mentions a few times is the same doctor whose journal I'm reading. Well, that's fun. I guess I can read them all? Of course. I don't mind if you read anything in my library. Just take care of it all. He had never really given anyone carte blanche with his collection of books before. It was strange how quickly he trusted her. I promise, I won't even dog-ear the pages. He chuckled. Well, I'm glad to know that. I might have a fit if you did that. Are you prone to fits, Dr. Christiansen? Not usually, but if someone defaces one of my books, then I'll have to have one. Aaron grinned at her as he got on I-35 and headed south. Fine. I'll be careful. I promise. Tell me what to expect when we get to your parents' house. He shrugged. Mom will hug me and tell me I don't get home often enough. We'll sit in the living room making small talk for a while, and then the maid will call us for supper. We'll eat and talk. Dad will offer us after-dinner drinks. Do you drink alcohol? He asked. I don't. Is that a problem? Not at all. I don't either. My parents drink when they have someone over. That's the only time that I know of. It's not a big deal either way. Dad keeps pop in his bar refrigerator as well. Pop? We're not in Arkansas anymore, are we? Marissa grinned at him. Fine. What do you call it? Most people call them soft drinks in Arkansas. Though some call everything a Coke, and then they have to say which kind of Coke they want. Soda just feels more appropriate than pop, don't you think? He shook his head. Around here, it's pop, and that's all there is to it. Well, that doesn't give much opportunity to be an individual, does it? I think people should be able to call it what they want. I like the word soda. Or just call it by the brand name. Coke, Pepsi, or whatever else. That works, I guess. I'm still calling it pop. You can if you absolutely need to. Marissa was surprised by how easy it now was to talk to him. Maybe her showing an interest in his field of study made things easier between them. When he pulled up in front of a large brown house, she sucked in a breath. What kind of people lived like this? She certainly didn't. Even the garage was huge. She wasn't sure she wanted to meet these people. Stop looking like a deer in the headlights, Aaron said. They're just people, and they've been wanting me to get married, so they'll be thrilled to meet you. He had no idea why she was freaking out over meeting his parents. She nodded, more nervous than she'd been before walking down the aisle to meet him. At least she knew he wanted her there. She wasn't so sure about his parents. He took her arm as they walked up the sidewalk. There were no kids playing in the streets here, and every lawn was perfectly manicured. This was a very wealthy community, and it made her nervous. They don't bite. I promise. He didn't bother to knock, simply throwing open the door and yelling. Mom, I'm here. True to Aaron's prediction, his mother rushed into the room and hugged him. You need to come home more often. Marissa smiled as his mother's attention moved to her. You must be Marissa. It's so good to meet you. It's nice to meet you as well, Mrs. Christiansen. Marissa had to resist an urge to curtsy to his mother, but she had a feeling he wouldn't find that nearly as amusing as she would. Oh, call me Tammy. All right, Tammy. Now tell me how you two met. Aaron wasn't very forthcoming on the phone, and he changed the subject to some woman named Mary who was going down the Oregon Trail. That boy of mine can't focus on anything in the 21st century for more than a minute or two. Tammy shook her head, and Marissa immediately felt as if she had an ally. Marissa grinned, looking over her shoulder at Aaron as she was led into the living room. We met at church. Oh, that's so nice. How long have you known one another? Marissa didn't want to lie, so she did her best to answer honestly if vaguely. Not long. It was definitely a whirlwind romance. Once Aaron figures out there's a real live person in the room with him, he can be quite charming. His mother laughed. That does always take him a while, doesn't it? She took a seat on the couch and patted the spot beside her. Now, are you going to be a stay-at-home mom like I was? I'm really not sure yet. I'll be home, because I have a job working from home, but I don't know if I'll keep working once the babies come. Marissa could see Aaron watching her closely, as if he was ready to jump in if she messed up. A man walked into the room, and he looked like an older, more distinguished Aaron. Marissa knew then that Aaron would age well, and always be as handsome as he was then. It was a bit disheartening. Women always faded with age, while men grew more handsome. Aaron got to his feet. Dad, I want you to meet my wife, Marissa. His father offered his hand, and she shook it. It's good to meet you, Marissa. I was starting to think Aaron would spend the rest of his life alone. I guess that could still happen, Marissa said with a smile, but I sure hope not. Aaron's father's laugh boomed throughout the room. Well, if you made it to the altar with him, I have a feeling you can tolerate just about anything. He'll never cheat on you, because he can't get his nose out of a book for long enough to meet someone. Marissa grinned at Aaron, who looked very uncomfortable. And to think, Marissa said, I was nervous about meeting the two of you. How could that be? No idea. Call me Ted, by the way. It's too confusing to call us anything else. Aaron answers to Dr. Christiansen too. All right, Ted. Marissa turned back to her new mother-in-law. So, when do we break out the naked baby pictures? Right now, Tammy said with a grin. Definitely right now. She hurried over to a shelf and returned with a big scrapbook album. So, I scrapbooked all the naked pictures onto one page. I thought it would be easier to humiliate him that way. Good move. It wasn't long before Marissa was completely in love with her new in-laws, though she wondered how they had fathered someone who was as hyper-focused on one topic as Aaron. Supper was wonderful. Her mother-in-law made it clear that she hadn't cooked supper, because she didn't like to cook, but she always baked anything they had for dessert. She loved to bake but hated to cook. "We'll make a good team," Marissa said. "I love to cook, but I'm not fond of baking." Tammy laughed. "Together, we can make anything." When it was time to leave, Marissa hugged both of her in-laws tightly. "I'm so glad I got to spend this evening with you. Come back anytime," Tammy told her. "We need to do this at least monthly, and we certainly don't mind driving up to Coon Rapids. Why don't we plan on y'all coming over 4 weeks from today, then? Tammy, you're on dessert, and I'll make the meal." "What will you make?" "I need to match my fabulous baking to whatever you're cooking. I was thinking I'd making some good old Southern fried chicken." Ted smiled. "That's perfect. I'll have Tammy make her key lime pie." With that, Marissa and Aaron were on their way. "I love your parents." Aaron shook his head. "Oh, really? I couldn't tell. You were thinking about the Oregon Trail anyway. You probably didn't even notice what we were talking about." Aaron was startled to realize she was completely wrong. He'd listened to the entire conversation all evening, and even enjoyed himself. Maybe. He couldn't admit to her that he paid attention to her. Then she would realize he was attracted, and that wasn't something he needed at all. "All right, tell me how many journals you have from this wagon train." "I have to read them all." The rest of the way home, Aaron talked about the journals, and Marissa listened. She loved when he started talking that way. Already she was feeling a great deal more attraction than she'd expected. Maybe Lachele hadn't screwed up after all. As she was trying to sleep that night, Marissa replayed the entire evening in her mind, and she was surprised when she realized just how much Aaron had participated in the conversation. It was as if he'd forgotten that he didn't belong in the 21st century. Maybe there was hope for them. She said a quick silent prayer that things continued to go well between them. She'd already concluded that she belonged with his parents, if not with him. He'd kissed her goodnight again, and she could still feel her lips tingling from his kiss. Aaron Christiansen packed a wallop when it came to kissing. And talking. And his face, she could stare at him all day, every day. Who said a man couldn't be beautiful? She knew better. Aaron was nothing short of gorgeous. She was keeping him. Chapter 6. Taking Aaron his lunch the next day was a welcome break for Marissa. She stopped work at 11, made lunch, and walked to the university with both lunches in Tupperware containers in a bag. When she walked into the building where she knew Aaron worked, she noticed a gaggle of girls standing outside the office that he'd indicated as his. The door was closed, so she wormed her way through the crowd and knocked. When there was no response, she tried the door and walked in, ignoring the girls who were crowded around her. "There's a mob of girls in the hallway," she said as she cleared off a corner of his desk and put their lunches down. She handed him a fork, and opened her container, smiling as the smell washed out over her. "I know. They're always there if I'm in the building, and oftentimes when I'm not." "What did you say to them?" He wondered if she'd managed to get rid of them for a while, or if they were all still out there, waiting for his office hours to start. "Nothing. I just knocked, and when you didn't respond, I walked in to bring you your lunch." He set aside the journal he'd been reading and opened his container. "This smells fabulous. I thought about bringing a cold lunch since it's summer, but it doesn't even feel like summer. Maybe late spring." She wasn't sure what she was going to do when the cold weather started. She'd have to learn to manage. "This is as hot as it gets," he said. "I hope you like snow and cold." "It gets cold in Arkansas, but we don't get a lot of snow. I guess I'll see how I like it as time goes by." He took a bite of his chicken and dumplings and sighed. "How did you know I love chicken and dumplings?" he asked. "I saw all your naked baby pictures and every photo your mother ever took of you last night. There were several with you covered in chicken and dumplings. I figured that meant you still liked it." He shook his head. "I'm enjoying this too much to worry about what you saw." She smiled. "I'm glad you like my cooking. I bought food for a week, but sometime we should talk about your favorite foods, so I can make them for you. Maybe I don't want a wife on the shelf after all." She shook her head. I guess I'm better than that silly elf everyone always posts pictures of at Christmas. The man was aggravating, but at least he was starting to better understand what a wife in his life would mean. Much better. He looked at her for a moment. You're on social media? She nodded. Yeah, I'm on Facebook. I tried Instagram, but I'm really not that into posting pictures of random crap. I'm on Facebook as well. I'll friend you there, and we'll change our Facebook statuses. Most of my students follow me on Facebook, and it might help with the lines of girls in the hallway. Do you ever open your door? He asked. Only during my office hours. His phone chimed. And they start now. He walked out from behind his desk and opened the door to his office, waiting as they all stared at Marissa for a moment, and then one of them asked what they were all wondering. Who's that woman? The girl was in one of his classes, but he had no idea which one. Aaron's smile wasn't forced for once. He was genuinely happy to be able to tell his devoted followers about his marriage. That's my wife. We got married on Saturday. Marissa, meet some of my students. Marissa stood, keeping her smile on her face. No wonder he had sent for a wife when he didn't actually want a wife. It's so nice to meet all of you. One girl burst into tears and ran down the hallway, but most of the others just looked disappointed. The girl who had asked who she was nodded. I figured as much. If you ever get sick of him, let me know. With that she walked away, and the others followed. Marissa held back her laughter. Don't you want to ask questions about the Oregon Trail? She called after them. When no one even turned around, she looked at Aaron. I think I've solved that problem for you. He grinned. Shall we finish our lunch? He wasn't completely convinced the problem was solved, but things seemed to be moving in the right direction. I'd like that. After they ate, he showed her the map of the Oregon Trail he had on the wall in his classroom. Then he flipped the page and showed her the Santa Fe Trail, the Old Spanish Trail, the California Trail, the Bozeman Trail and the Mormon Trail. The most popular now is the Oregon Trail, but I don't know that it would be without that silly game made about it. You have died of dysentery. She tilted her head to one side and stuck her tongue out while closing her eyes. He laughed, leaning down and brushing his lips across hers. Get out of here. She grinned. Fine. But that means I'm not making enchiladas for supper. Oh yes, you are. What kind do you make? I like sour cream beef enchiladas. They're my favorite. Works for me. I'll be home around 4, but we can eat whenever you want. He was actually looking forward to having meals made for him. He hated having to decide where he wanted Grubhub to deliver from. Marissa nodded. I work until 5, so after that sometime. When Marissa got to the door, she noticed a couple of girls standing in the doorway gaping at them, so she called over her shoulder, Aaron, I need to get back to work. Would you bring the Tupperware on your desk home tonight? Sure. Aaron couldn't stop smiling. He knew she'd said what she did to scare the girls away. She was a good wife, always trying to help him reach his goals. Marissa hurried home and got back to work on planning Disney vacations, wondering if she'd ever be able to convince Aaron that they should go together. Probably not, but she would at least try. He was quiet when he arrived home, immediately sitting at his desk and picking up a journal to read. He read silently while she finished her work, and then talked to her a little about his day, something he'd never even had a desire to do before. He didn't care to see anyone at the end of his day. When he got home, he worked some more. Now, well, it seemed nice to have a wife waiting for him. When it was time for her to fix supper, he sat at the table and talked to her while she cooked. She was surprised, but pleased. It really wasn't something she'd ever have expected him to do. While they ate the enchiladas, she said, I hope to have a little time to read this evening. Mary's journal is fascinating. It's not something I ever would have chosen to read, but I love it. Maybe I really will write a book about the trail. If you think you could do it, I'd be happy to be your technical advisor. Aaron loved the idea of encouraging her to do something a bit more intellectual than planning Disney vacations. It seemed like a very odd job for someone to have. He'd love it if she took advantage of the discounts at the college and went back to school as well. He didn't really care what she did as long as she didn't stay in one place in life. Maybe I'll take you up on that. Marissa wasn't really sure if she wanted to spend time writing a book. The prospect was scary, but there were definitely stories in her head with all the reading she'd done so far, and planned to continue doing. She'd have to decide if getting the stories out was worth her time. Did you get all the work you needed to do done today? I'm not sure how your job works. Do you have an hourly wage? Or is it by the job? By the job. I find out what a family is like. What their favorite things at Disney are. How much they're willing to spend on meals and how many days they want in the parks. Then I plan everything about their vacation from their meals to their fast passes. I put them in the resort of their dreams. I'll even book them for a day at Universal and get a car to take them if they want to do Harry Potter World. That seems like a lot to do for one family. Aaron shook his head. Who knew going to Disney World was more work than going to Six Flags? She laughed. Six Flags has nothing on Disney. Trust me on this. Disney takes 2 weeks if you want to do most everything. Six Flags takes a day. She wanted to be offended that he would even begin to compare Six Flags to Disney World. I guess that's true. Have you ever been to Disney World? Nope. I've never wanted to go. My parents offered to take me when I was 10, but I wanted to drive the Oregon Trail instead. Aaron shrugged. I've always known what I wanted from life, though that probably seems strange to you. It doesn't seem strange. I understand there are things people would rather do than hang out with a giant rodent in Florida. But I want you to try my favorite rodent. Just once. I want to take you to Epcot and show you all the different countries in the World Showcase. I want to take you to Food and Wine and have you taste small plates from different countries. It's fun and it's educational. He frowned for a moment. I guess we could do that. He didn't really like the idea, but he wanted her to be happy, so he'd try it. Once. Could you take a long weekend in October or November? And not at Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is evil at Disney. I guess I could look at that. Maybe give my students a paper to write while we gallivant around Disney. I don't have to get my picture taken with Mickey Mouse, do I? You only have to get your pic taken with Mickey if you want a happy wife. If you don't care if your wife is happy, then you don't have to. Easy decision, huh? Marissa grinned at the face he made. Aaron groaned. He was enjoying every minute he spent with his wife, but he hated the idea of getting his picture taken with a giant Mickey Mouse. He'd have to wait and see if he still liked spending time with her in October. She was bound to get on his nerves by then. We'll see. I'll look at my syllabus and let you know when I want to go. Can you make everything happen that quickly? If you give me a date within a week or 2, I can make it happen. I just don't want to take too long, because we're already missing out on one of my favorite restaurants by not having booked 6 months in advance. Marissa shrugged. She could do without eating at Be Our Guest for just one trip. 6 months in advance to eat a meal at Disney World? Are you kidding me? There were people who actually cared enough about what they ate they would book food 6 months in advance. It sounded like craziness to him. Marissa grinned. You have no idea about the food at Disney, do you? He shook his head. Not really. What would I know about it? A lot of people go to Disney just for the food. They are amazing in ways you would never imagine. My favorite restaurant is called Be Our Guest. It's decorated like the Beast's castle in Beauty and the Beast. It's your only opportunity to have a photo taken with Beast in the entire park, and the food is divine. If you eat in the West Wing, you can see a painting that changes from Beast to the prince he used to be every single time it lightnings. And yes, it lightnings inside. He stared at her for a moment. All that in a restaurant? Who took the time to think up these things? He didn't want to ask her, because he knew she'd have the answer. Yes. And my favorite dessert is the gray stuff. The gray stuff. You act like that should mean something to me? Marissa sang a few bars of the Be Our Guest song from Beauty and the Beast. Seriously, it's so good. I have no idea what it is, and they won't tell you that, but I don't care. I'll eat it every chance I get. Tell me about food and wine. While she did the dishes, she talked to him about the food and wine festival at Epcot, and he nodded, smiling. That really does sound good. You don't have to drink wine, do you? Oh, of course not. They even have some drinks that are alcohol-free. It's just fun to do, and the food is yummy. I try to go every year, which bugs my mother a lot. She doesn't like it when I travel alone. And John had never been willing to go to Disney with her. You always went alone? He asked. She nodded. I was engaged for a couple of years to a man named John, but he wasn't willing to travel with me. My friend Janelle is married with 3-year-old twin daughters. She went with me a couple of times before the twins were born. It felt weird telling him about John, but it was time. They were growing closer, much closer than she'd ever expected. What happened with your engagement? He'd had no idea she'd been engaged. It was strange to think his wife had once had deeper feelings for a stranger than she did for him. Marissa shrugged. He was killed in a car wreck a few months ago. He told me he was leaving town for work, and instead, he was leaving town with his mistress. You were still engaged when he died? Aaron asked. He couldn't help but wonder what their relationship had been like. Had they been living together? Marissa nodded. He never would set the date. We were engaged for 3 years. I should have known something was up, but I trusted him. Were you two living together? Aaron asked, needing to know. Not at all. I don't believe people should sleep together before marriage. I think that's why he kept putting off the wedding. You would have thought he'd want to get married faster, but he was apparently content. I don't know why he kept me on the line, maybe simply because I was more respectable. She shrugged. It was a mess, and I'm glad it's over. You're not still mourning him? Aaron asked with narrowed eyes. He couldn't take their relationship to the next level if she was still in love with that John jerk. I don't think I ever did mourn him. I found out he was cheating on me within seconds of learning he was dead. It's hard to mourn someone who cheated on you. I missed having someone come over often for a while. I hate cooking for one, so he came over for supper almost every night. Other than that, it was just humiliating. He nodded, pleased. He felt like their relationship would have had to stop in its tracks if she had said anything else. I'm glad you're not still hung up on him. Why's that? She asked. He hadn't seemed to really care before. Because I want you to be hung up on me. He walked into the kitchen as soon as she pressed the start button on the dishwasher and wrapped his arms around her. He lowered his mouth to hers and kissed her with everything that was bottled up inside him, which even he had to admit was a whole lot of passion. She clung to his shoulders, standing on tiptoe to get closer to him. He backed her against the counter, and continued the kiss, his hand stroking her through her thin t-shirt. Finally, she broke off the kiss. I'm not ready for sex yet. He groaned. What if I'd asked for it on our wedding night? I wouldn't have been ready then either. It's the truth. I want to get to know you a little better first. But how he'd acted on their wedding day had made a lasting impression on her. It was hard for her to know if he was being affectionate because he wanted something from her, or if it was natural. He rested his forehead against hers. How long are we talking about here? I'm not negotiating a time frame with you, Aaron. When I'm ready, you'll be the first to know. She ran her hand down his cheek. Besides, sex would only distract you from your studies. Aaron laughed, shaking his head. Having you around is doing a great job of that on its own. I have never been this distracted in my entire life. Usually I eat, sleep, work, and study. There's no room for anything else. All of a sudden, I'm spending time thinking about you during the day. I look forward to talking to you in the evenings. It's like I'm a real man or something, and I'm not sure how much I like it. Marissa smiled. I like it. Does that count for anything? I guess. He took her hand in his and pulled her down the hall, toward the bedrooms. Stopping outside the study door, he sighed. At least you got some of the girls at school to leave me alone. Only a few of them follow me around now. Ah. You must miss your little entourage. One girl did get up in the middle of class and run out crying during my lecture on marriage on the trail today. It was really spectacular and annoying all at once. She laughed. I'll bring you lunch again tomorrow. If I do that all week, the girls will figure out I'm sticking around. You'd think they'd figure that out simply because we're married, but girls are silly. Aren't you glad I'm a grown-up woman and not silly any longer? She waggled her eyebrows at him, and he laughed. I don't recall ever laughing this much in a short period of time before. You really are good for me, Marissa. She stood on tiptoe and kissed him quickly. I'm glad. Now, we don't have a ton of time before I want to be in bed. Time for our journals. He groaned. I want to spend time with you. I have an idea then. What's that? He asked, looking skeptical. Let's snuggle on the couch together with our journals. He laughed. All right. We'll read until bedtime, but I'm kissing you goodnight. I've never protested you kissing me even once, have I? You know I want all the kisses and affection you have the ability to dish out. I guess I do know that. He got the doctor's journal, while she grabbed Mary's. What's Mary doing now? She just held her little sister's hand while the doctor set her leg. Now little Annie is going to get to ride in the wagon, and I think it will lighten Mary's load a bit. That'll be nice for her, won't it? What happens at the end? Get there and see. You'll get no spoilers from me. She laughed. I'm talking like these people are still alive. You're a bad influence on me, Professor. Chapter 7. The following weeks felt as if Marissa was living in her very own version of paradise. Aaron was more attentive than she had ever dreamed he would be. Every day she took him lunch up at the school, and every day there were fewer and fewer girls outside his office. Finally, on Friday of the fourth week, there were no girls at all. She opened Aaron's door, and he immediately put down his journal, smiling at her. Well, if it isn't my favorite wife. Your favorite wife, huh? Did you take a trip down the Mormon trail today? He laughed. You know, you shouldn't make fun of the Mormons. I wasn't. I was just asking if you decided that you were on a different trail today. At the time of the Mormon trail, the Mormon men had multiple wives. They don't now, of course. Do you realize that only a third of the men had multiple wives? It wasn't as common as you'd think. I had no idea. I thought it was what they all did. Not at all. Now I want you to make sure you're not poking fun. Some of my very favorite people are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He grabbed her and kissed her softly. You need to start coming earlier and staying later. Then how will you get any work done? She asked, shaking her head. No, I'll be here at noon and leave at 1 like every other day. She sat down and yawned. How's everything going today? They made small talk about his work and hers while they ate their lunch. It's hard to believe we've been married a whole month already. I feel like you're a different man than the one I met on our wedding day. I'm the same. I just don't get distracted by work as easily. Or I get easily distracted from work by my wife. It's one of those. She smiled. Well, I'm making a special supper tonight. I thought we could celebrate a whole month of wedded bliss. That sounds good to me. I may be home just a little late. I have something I have to do after work. If she was going to make a special meal, then the least he could do was buy her roses on his way home. All right. I'll plan supper for about 6:30. Does that work for you? It does. Do you have to work this weekend, or do I get you all to myself? Well, you and the journals get me. He laughed. Is this Sunday the one where we have supper with my parents? For some reason, he couldn't seem to keep track. She nodded. Yup. They're coming here, which means I need to make sure the apartment is immaculate. Mrs. Larson will take care of it. She's great about making the apartment look perfect. Aaron wasn't at all worried about his parents' visit. They weren't picky people, and they loved Marissa. But you won't let her in your study. I think we should leave for a bit and let Mrs. Larson do her thing even in the study. She wanted everything to look perfect for his parents. She couldn't understand why he didn't feel the same. He groaned. You're trying to upset my whole life here. Marissa bit her lip. And will your mom want to see the whole apartment? If she does, she'll know we're not sleeping together. That's okay. I'll tell her all the begging in the world won't get you into my bed. She laughed. You'd better not. Besides, you haven't asked in a long time. The answer would be different now. It would? He got to his feet. I'm going to go tell Bob I'm too sick to finish teaching today. He'd never missed work. One day wouldn't hurt a thing. No, you're not. I have to work anyway. She was only a little amused by his reaction. He groaned. You're killing me, Marissa. Are you going to still be attentive after we make love? Or are you going to go back to ignoring me for your journals? That was her biggest fear. Once he got what he wanted, she was afraid he'd go back to studying all the time and not talking to her at all. You ignore me as often as I ignore you these days. Marissa shook her head. Well, we'll have to be careful to not ignore each other then. She got to her feet and packed the Tupperware back into her bag, leaning down to kiss him. I'll be waiting for you at home. He held her close and deepened the kiss, and only lifted his head when there was a knock at the door. It was Bob. Hey, Bob. Bob shook his head. You two are definitely newlyweds. We're not even ashamed of it, Marissa said, kissing Aaron's cheek. I'm out of here. I have to get back to work. Aaron watched her go, unaware that his boss was watching him. You really love her, don't you? Bob asked. I really do. I've never in my life thought I could love someone as much as I love her. She's even reading the Oregon Trail journals with me. All of his students who had taken his classes and pretended an interest to get close to him had only annoyed him. Marissa developing an interest in his love for history made him happy. Bob laughed. It's always good when you can share the same interests. Did you need me for something? Aaron asked. Oh, yeah. We're having a dinner at my house next Friday night. Several of the professors in the department and their wives. I thought maybe you and Marissa would like to come. It was the first time Aaron had been invited to anything like that, and he knew it was because he hadn't had a wife before. I'll have to check with Marissa, but I think it will be fine. Good. We'll see you there then. Bob walked away, and Aaron thought that helping his career was just one of the ways Marissa had made his life better. It was hard for him to believe he'd ever thought having a wife would be a bad thing. She'd certainly taught him differently. On his way home, he stopped at a florist shop and bought 24 roses. He felt very conspicuous doing it, but he refused to let it bother him. His wife was more important than any embarrassment he may feel. Besides, he was hoping to finally get her into bed with him that night, and then they could move her clothes. It would be nice to have her sleeping beside him all night every night. When he walked into the apartment a short while later, he sniffed deeply, knowing she was cooking something delicious, but he wasn't quite able to figure out what it was. He walked to the kitchen and held the flowers out in front of him, for the best wife in the whole wide world. Marissa smiled and took the flowers from him. They're beautiful. You shouldn't have, but I'm so glad you did. She buried her face in the roses, before putting them into a glass filled with water. We need a vase. You like them? He asked hesitantly. I didn't know what your favorite flower was, but I thought everyone loved roses, so I got you roses. Roses are perfect. I don't know that I have a favorite flower. I've never really thought about it. She knew most women had a favorite, but any flowers made her happy. Well, when you decide what your favorite is, would you let me know? I need to be able to get you your favorite flower and not just any flower. That's a good point. She rushed at him and wrapped her arms around him. Thank you so much. You're welcome. He buried his face in her hair. We don't have to eat dinner right away, you know. Yes, we do. I'm not letting my supper go bad. What is it? It smells good, but I don't recognize the smell. She smiled. Good. I wanted to surprise you. I made fettuccine with a homemade chicken Alfredo sauce. It's one of my favorite meals. I love fettuccine Alfredo. You didn't think to make garlic bread to go with it, did you? I sure did. And I made a zuppa toscana as well. So yummy. Marissa was pleased. He seemed happy with the meal she'd made. It was more work than she usually put into supper, but it felt like a celebration. Sounds delicious. Aaron caught her by the hips and pulled her to him, kissing her. You're going to have to work hard to keep me happy if you keep spoiling me like this. I think I like you spoiled. She remembered thinking her mother had gone overboard doing little things for her father, but she understood now. It felt good to pamper her husband. As they ate, she constantly felt his eyes on her, and she finally shook her head. We're never going to finish our meal at this rate. Pay attention to your food, Professor. He looked down at the plate of delicious food in front of him, and though his mind wasn't on food, he took a big bite. I hope it reheats well. Why do you say that? She asked. Because there's no way we're going to finish all this. You must have thought you were cooking for a family of 4. Marissa smiled. I do tend to make too much. We'll have it for lunch Sunday. Sounds good to me. He wiped his face with a napkin. By the way, Bob invited us to his house for a small dinner party next Friday night. Do you mind if we go? He only ever invites the married couples, and I'm finally married. Sounds good to me. Should I take something? I have no idea. I'll ask on Monday. His wife may want a hand cooking. As soon as they were finished eating, he got to his feet and took her hand. Dishes can wait. Your husband can't. She laughed. I want the dishes done. I know you're in a hurry, but I hate leaving dishes in the sink. Her mother had ingrained in her from a very young age that if you left dishes in the sink, you got bugs. She didn't want bugs, so she would do the dishes. He groaned. You're really going to make me wait? You liked supper, don't you want me to put up the food so we can eat it again? I guess. Aaron couldn't believe how impatient he was feeling. It was a new feeling for him. I'm going to go into the study and read. Would you please hurry? She laughed. You're a mess, Aaron Christiansen. Yes, I'll hurry. Good. I will try to read, but I might be pacing impatiently. Either way, I'm doing the dishes. Marissa rinsed off their plates and put them into the dishwasher, putting the fettuccine and sauce into a bowl. After she was finished, she approached the study and sat down in her chair. Dishes are done. We'll feast on leftovers for lunch tomorrow. She usually took him leftovers to work for lunch as well. She really enjoyed the little ritual of taking him lunch and the two of them eating it at his desk together. Sounds good to me. Aaron stood and took her hand, pulling her to her feet. I believe you said you were ready to make love, and I'm not going to wait another minute. He tugged on her hand and led her into his bedroom, stopping at the foot of the bed to kiss her passionately. They'd kissed enough in the time they'd been together that neither of them thought about it as they tilted their heads and kissed. His hands roamed frantically over her body, and she had a feeling he wasn't going to be able to go slowly. That was all right though, because next time they would, she was sure they'd be making love more than once that weekend. It didn't take long for him to strip them both and push her down onto his bed. This is where I should have had you sleep that very first night. I don't know what was wrong with me to think I didn't want this part of marriage with you. I don't either, but I'm glad we took the time to get to know one another. Now we're truly making love and not just having wild passionate monkey sex. He let out a bark of laughter. I think I'm keeping you. Any woman who can make a man laugh while he's making love to her has got to be someone worth having. I sure hope so. I don't have any more silliness up my sleeve, so it's probably time to get serious about this thing. Probably. He kissed her again, his hand stroking her bare skin. When he took her nipple between his lips, she let out a low moan, and he grinned. I've discovered all of your secrets now. I know what you like. She ran her fingers through his hair. I guess you do know what I like. But I know what you like too. He lifted his head for a moment. Oh yeah? What do I like? The Oregon Trail and me, in that order. I'm not so sure about the order anymore. I've been more interested in spending time with you than I have in studying. I'm not sure I can continue this way. She ran one foot from his knee to his ankle. Now can you continue? His lips were an inch from hers as he said, oh, yeah, and kissed her to within an inch of her life. Every touch made her body scream with need. Every kiss made her want to become one with him. When they finished, he sprawled onto the bed on his back, breathing heavily, and Marissa rested her head on his chest. Wow. He chuckled softly. Ditto. She glanced over him at the clock. It was only 8. We have a few choices. We can go to sleep. We can watch a movie. Or we can do more research. She combed her fingers along the hair on his chest. What do you think? Let's research. I think you are going to have to write that book series we keep talking about. I can just see your name on a book cover. What would you call your series? Clover Creek Caravan, I think. My mind keeps going back to their nights camping on Clover Creek. They all loved it there. She shrugged. Someday we'll need to ride out and find this Clover Creek. Aaron nodded. Perfect series title. You like alliteration, I guess? Marissa shrugged. Who doesn't? He smiled. What will you call them? I'm not sure. I'll have to work on that some more. She looked around for her clothes, but they were nowhere to be seen. Where on earth did you put my clothes? I think they're at the foot of the bed. He stroked a hand over her arm. Do you need them? I do. He sighed. Tell me where your pajamas are, and I'll go get you a pair. Then you can run around in pajamas all night. Middle drawer of the dresser on top. He nodded, getting out of bed and leaving the bedroom, still completely naked. I'll get some. She sat up in the bed, keeping the sheet tucked under her arms. It seemed strange that she'd just slept with a man she'd only known for a month, when she'd never felt safe sleeping with John. Aaron was such a good man when his nose wasn't buried in a book. She hadn't expected to start feeling so much for him so soon, but it had happened. Underneath the absent-minded professor was a man who made her heart beat faster. How could that be a bad thing? They spent the evening in the study, both of them reading journals, and both of them taking notes. Aaron was secretly thrilled Marissa was going to try to write a book series. No one should spend her entire life planning other people's Disney vacations. When it was time for bed, she went into his arms sweetly and they made love again, much more slowly that time. She fell asleep with a smile on her lips, pleased that she'd married the only man in the world who was perfect for her, though why she was suddenly believing that purple-haired matchmaker, she had no idea. Eventually, she'd have to call Dr. Lachele and tell her she was right, but it didn't have to be immediately. She was sure Dr. Lachele would put an extra purple feather in her cap over that one. Chapter 8. Aaron and Marissa worked Saturday morning to get all of Marissa's things in the master bedroom, hanging beside his. They spent the rest of the morning studying, breaking only to go to lunch when it was time for Mrs. Larson to clean the study. We're going to go get lunch while you finish up, Marissa said. She and Mrs. Larson had built up a rapport during the weekly cleaning sessions. That sounds wonderful. You two have fun. We will. I'm craving Chick-fil-A, and he's not getting out of it this time. He groaned. I want to go somewhere someone will serve us. I serve you every single meal you eat. Aren't you spoiled enough? Marissa asked. Mrs. Larson laughed softly. You two work it out. I'll be an hour or two finishing up. Marissa nodded, following Aaron out to his car. I guess Chick-fil-A doesn't make sense, but you're getting it for lunch on Monday. I guess that works. I just don't know why you want Chick-fil-A when someone could serve you for a change. I miss their frozen lemonades. And their chicken nuggets. They have the best chicken nuggets in the whole wide world. Let's do Texas Roadhouse instead. She shrugged. I could use a good country fried steak. That sounds yummy. Good. 'Cause I want their cactus blossom for an appetizer. What if I want something else as an appetizer? She asked. Did you ever think of that? What do you want for an appetizer? Oh, I love the cactus blossom. She smiled at him sweetly as he groaned and backed out of his parking space. Are you trying to make me crazy? That depends. Is it working? He laughed. You are a mess, my little wife. I try. As they drove, he pointed out different places around town. You need to know where everything is, not just where to get groceries. She shrugged. I get everything but groceries from Amazon. I'm used to small town living. Well, you don't really have to here. We have a Target and a million other stores. Don't you like to try on clothes? I thought all women loved to shop for clothes. She was certainly not like the other women he'd known. She shrugged. Not me. I've never really enjoyed shopping. I don't like to waste my time that way. When I was a kid, my mom would drive us to the nearest mall and set us free for hours, and I hated it. My sisters loved it, though. How many sisters do you have? And why am I just now asking you this? He felt like he should know everything about her with all the talking they'd done, but they'd talked a lot about the Oregon Trail. I have 3 sisters and a brother. I'm second oldest. My older sister was always dropping her kids off at my place while I was trying to work. She didn't think what I did was a legitimate job because I was home all day. It made me so crazy. At least it was only her, he said, shrugging. Yeah, the others expected me to run their errands for them. The next in line after me showed up one day with a grocery list and handed it to me along with the key to her apartment. When I told her I wouldn't do it, she got mad, telling me my schedule was easier than anyone's she knew. But you were working. Aaron said, shaking his head. Why don't people think anyone else works? No clue. And thank you for taking my side without even meeting them. It's my job to take your side. I'm married to you, not them. Marissa smiled. My hero. He pulled into the parking lot at Texas Roadhouse and parked. When she reached for the handle to open her door, he turned her head to him and kissed her quickly. What was that for? For making me happier than I ever dreamed I could be, Aaron said before getting out of the car. He took her hand as they walked into the restaurant and waited to be seated. 5 minutes later, they were still looking through their menus when a perky young brunette came to the table. She asked what they wanted to drink, and as Aaron asked for Mountain Dew and the cactus blossom, she turned pale. Dr. Christiansen. Are you one of my students? He asked. He never could keep track of all the girls in his classes. Even though his classes were small, they all seemed to melt into one in his head. Yes, I am. I'm in your Oregon Trail class this semester. You see me every day. Oh, sorry, he couldn't get his brain to tell her his name for anything. It's Miranda. Sorry, Miranda. I don't usually learn my students' names, though I know I should. It's hard for me. I see. Miranda quickly jotted down what they wanted. I guess this is your new wife? Does everyone on campus know I just got married? He asked. He was surprised that the student grapevine was as active as the staff's. Of course, we do. Every girl who has ever taken one of your classes has a crush on you. Is it so shocking we pay attention when you show up with a beautiful woman and say she's your wife? Miranda stalked away angrily after that. Aaron looked at Marissa with a surprised look on his face. Why do my female students think they have a hold on me? He asked. Marissa shrugged. You're handsome. You have to realize that. Teaching college courses means girls aren't far off from your age. How old are you? I can't believe I don't know that. Or when your birthday is. I'm 28, and my birthday is next week, he told her. Next week? You never told me. I just did. He shrugged. I've never considered my birthday very important. Well, I consider it important. Tell me what your very favorite meal is, and I'll make it for supper that night. What night? Friday, so we're already going to supper at Bob's. But we can do it a different night if you feel like it's that important. It won't bother me if we don't celebrate it at all. We're going to celebrate. What's your favorite meal? Marissa asked. She could put together a nice meal and get him a gift by Friday. She might have to shop, but she could probably handle that. I like chicken and dumplings. I know it's a kid meal, but it's my very favorite. Then I will make chicken and dumplings for you. Marissa shook her head. I can't believe your birthday almost happened without you telling me. I don't know when your birthday is either, he said calmly. I didn't think it was a big deal. June 25th. And you're how old? 24. She leaned back as the onion came and her drink was placed on the table in front of her. Do you know what you want to order yet? Miranda asked. Her voice was soft, but she still looked upset to Marissa. I'd like the country fried steak with mashed potatoes. Cream or brown gravy? Cream. And for my second side, I want green beans. Marissa enjoyed watching Aaron's discomfort. The girl had already admitted she had a crush on him, and she was right there taking his order. He didn't handle things like that well. I'll have the ribeye with a loaded baked potato and chili, thanks Dr. Christiansen. Mrs. Christiansen. Her words were polite, but her glare wasn't. Marissa waited until she was out of earshot before whispering. She likes you a lot. He groaned. I hope you're wrong. She already admitted to it. Marissa broke off a piece of fried onion and popped it into her mouth. We're going to have to go on a walk later to work this off. He groaned. I don't want to. Aaron felt like he got enough exercise walking to the college and back every day. We'll walk down by the river, and then we'll study the rest of the day. I know a more pleasant way to work off excess calories. Not until you've walked with me by the river. That's my favorite thing about living here, and you never want to do it. Oh, I want to do it. I just don't want to walk by the river. His wink left her no doubt as to his meaning. She rolled her eyes. Fine. I'll walk by myself. I don't need my husband to go with me. Maybe if you gain a little weight, all the girls you teach won't glare at me all the time. That might be nice, he said with a wink, taking a big bite of the onion. You never gain weight, do you? He shook his head. I weigh what I did as a junior in high school. Before you moved in, I ate takeout for supper every night, and ate fast food at school the other 2 meals. She sighed. I don't think I like you at this moment. I will need to take that walk if I don't want to have gained 3 pounds by Monday. Are you sure that's the kind of exercise you want to do and not the fun kind? Aaron winked at her, and she laughed. What journal are you working on now? She asked, changing the subject abruptly. Have you finished the journals of the wagon train I'm reading about? He was happy to accept the change, discussing the journal of a young man who was going west to start a ranch on his own. His name is James Pruitt, but everyone calls him Jamie, it seems. He's only 23, and he's convinced that he wants to go out west and help change the world. They all think they're going to have better lives out west. Well, all the men do. The women are giving up friends, easy shopping, and schools for the kids. They are taking on so much more work by going west. Why? It didn't seem fair to her that the men wanted more money, and as a result, the women got a great deal more work. Because their men demand it, and women in that time period were taught not to talk back to their husbands. He shrugged. I can't imagine being married to someone who was afraid to share her real opinions with me. Sometimes I think I need to go back in time by 170 years to join a wagon train, and sometimes I know it would make me absolutely crazy. It would be awful not to have a wife who said whatever she wanted to say. I wouldn't go west with you, Aaron. You'd be on your own, and I'd stay with my family and friends back east. I read a journal a couple of months ago about a woman who gave birth one day, and they started for Oregon in the rain the next. A woman's life was so hard back then. I wouldn't want that for you. Miranda obviously heard that last bit of what Aaron said because she shook her head. He only married you because you're interested in the Oregon Trail. Maybe, but all of the female students taking his classes are as well, right? Marissa knew her answer was a bit snarky, but it was obvious Miranda had a chip on her shoulder. Did all of the girls at that college sit around and talk about her and how she got Aaron to marry her? Miranda put their plates down. Do either of you want more to drink? Marissa pushed her empty lemonade glass toward Miranda. Thank you, I'd love more. I'm good, Aaron said. He watched as Miranda hurried away, and shook his head at Marissa. Good comeback. I tried hard, she said with a grin. After their meal, they drove to the apartment, and walked over to the river. There were kids on the rope swing playing in the water, and Marissa smiled as she watched them. She had no idea if Aaron even wanted children. Any desire to have kids, she asked. He shrugged. I think I'd like a couple. Someday. He wasn't in a hurry for children, but he wouldn't mind 2 or 3. Yeah, I think I do want a few. Maybe 6 or so. He gaped at her, and she giggled. I really only want 1 or 2, but it was fun to see your face. Aaron wrapped his arm around her and tickled her. Brat. She was still giggling when they got back to the apartment 30 minutes later. Mrs. Larson was gone, but the place was immaculate. Even the study had been cleaned, and the spare room had been turned back into a spare room. Mrs. Larson is amazing. Can we keep her? You don't mind that she comes in every week? I work full-time. I like having someone do the real cleaning, and I just do the dishes and pick up after us. I haven't pushed a vacuum since we got married. In fact, I don't even know where our vacuum is. He shrugged. I don't either. There has to be one. She couldn't do this good of a job on the carpets without one. I'm sure I have one. Somewhere. He wandered into the study and plopped down in his chair. I'm going to get started on our studying. I'm going to find the vacuum cleaner, because it's going to bug me otherwise, and then I'm going to join you. I have beef tips in the crock pot for supper. She still had half of her country fried steak, but she'd eat that for a snack while he was at work this week. She wandered from room to room, opening every closet. She finally found it in the coat closet in the living room. When she joined him in the study, she raised her hands in triumph. I found it. He didn't even glance up. That's nice. I'm dancing naked in front of you, she said, just to see his reaction. I'll meet you in the bedroom, he said, jumping to his feet. Then he looked at her. Hey, you're not naked. I guess not. But it was fun to pretend for a minute. Now I'm going to help you get naked to teach you not to lie to me. Aaron smirked at her. I'm not complaining. The meal with his parents went particularly well. Aaron and Marissa were waiting for them when they arrived, and dinner was in the oven. All she had to do was take it out, and they could eat. They sat down in the living room, and Marissa was reminded why she liked Aaron's parents so much. They were wealthy, yes, but they were some of the most down-to-earth people she'd ever known. Aaron leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. I've converted Marissa. She's reading my Oregon Trail journals with me. Tammy sighed dramatically. It was bound to happen with as much time as you two spend together. I don't think it's good for 2 people to live in past centuries, but I guess it's all right. I know it's all right, Marissa said with a grin. I'm really enjoying them, and Aaron has convinced me that I need to write a fictionalized account of the journey of the people I'm reading about. I'm excited to do it. His father smiled. At least you're doing something practical with the knowledge you're gaining. Aaron just learns more and more. He already has a doctorate. What more is there to learn about the Oregon Trail? So much. Aaron said. I barely scratched the surface. There was a professor in Oregon by the name of Milton Madden. He died before I chose the Oregon Trail as my primary focus of study, but I would have loved to sit down with him and just soak up everything he said like a sponge. I've heard there's a place in Idaho that has all his research books and slides he took over the years. What I wouldn't give to be able to go there and just study for a few months. You can't? Marissa asked. Now she was curious too. He always made her want to learn more, and she loved it. She wasn't taking on quite as much work, because she was having too much fun learning. Not that I know of. I wish there were a way. Aaron shrugged. I might call and see if they'd let me spend some time in their library. His parents praised her for the supper, and they genuinely seemed to enjoy being around her. As they said goodnight, Marissa thought about how thankful she was to have gotten those two as her in-laws, and not some people she wouldn't or couldn't have liked. No, the Christiansens were the perfect in-laws for her. Next month? Tammy asked. Do we want to meet in the middle or go back to your place? Marissa was fine either way. Meet at my place, and maybe the next month we'll meet in the middle. Sounds perfect. It's hard to believe we're already at the end of July. Summer school will be over soon, and then the fall semester will start. Marissa had talked to Tammy about the vacation to Disney that evening. I can't wait for our Disney trip. You two will have a wonderful time. I almost wish we'd forced Aaron to go when he was younger, instead of driving the Oregon Trail. It was fun and educational, but he wasn't able to be a kid on that trip. You teach him to act his age, would you? He was born an old man. Marissa nodded, hugging her mother-in-law. I will do my very best. After they'd gone, Aaron put his arm around Marissa. I think we have time for an hour of studying, and then an hour of lovemaking, and then we can still get our 8 hours of sleep. She laughed. Sounds perfect to me. We have our priorities straight, don't we? I sure think so. The following day, Marissa started writing the first book in her series. She didn't know what she was going to call it yet, or exactly what would happen, but she was going to do her best to tell the story of two of the people from the Oregon Trail. She knew she wanted to write the series as romances, so she had been taking careful notes from the journals to decide who she would write about. There were a surprising number of marriages on the wagon train, all officiated by Pastor Jedediah Scott. She decided she would start with Pastor Scott's marriage to Hannah Mosby, which happened right before they left on the trail. From their journals, she'd gleaned that they hadn't really known one another before they married, and they had honeymooned on the trail. Hannah had learned what it meant to be a wife, and the pastor, well, he'd learned that not all women were perfectly obedient. So, she took what little she really knew and she added to it. She took Aaron his lunch on her break as usual, but she didn't tell him she'd been writing. She had already made plans to take the rest of the week off work so she could work on this book. Thankfully, she'd caught up, and she had a little bit of time she could spare before she was sent another assignment. By Friday afternoon, she had what she felt was a very good start on the book, which was more than 20,000 words. She was only planning to make the book 40,000, so she was half there. On Saturday afternoon, she asked about his week, and he'd told her about giving the students study guides for their finals. How many families did you plan vacations for this week? Just one. I did something else too. She turned to her computer and clicked the send button on the email she'd already written, with her book attached. You're the technical advisor. You need to let me know if I got things right or if I messed them all up. Aaron spun to his computer and opened her document. Are you finished? He asked, surprised she'd written so quickly. No, but I'm halfway done. I want to know what you think so far. Okay, then go away and leave me alone. He began reading, a smile on his face. He was so proud of her for at least trying, whether she was any good or not. While Aaron read, Marissa finished supper and set the table. She was dying to know his opinion, but the average reader took about an hour to read 20,000 words, according to the research she'd done. She needed to give him time. She settled on the couch with the next journal she was reading, and had been concentrating on every evening while he was there. She was reading about Margaret Balling, a young widow, who was only 21. She'd lost everything when her husband died, including the right to live on the land he'd worked so hard. She'd only had daughters, so she took the two girls, and they headed west on a wagon train. She knew it was going to be hard when she set out, but she'd had no idea how very hard it would be. The girls were constantly tired and they complained about riding in the wagon, and then they complained about walking. She was at her wit's end by the time they reached Nebraska. Aaron walked into the room just as she finished the journal. You got almost all the details perfectly. I made a couple of notes in the margins. But more than anything, I love it so far. You're an amazing writer, Marissa smiled. She knew Aaron well enough to know he wouldn't lie to her. She was going to be a writer when she grew up, and no one was going to stop her. Chapter 9. A month later, the book was done, and Marissa was walking on air. It was time for Aaron to get ready for the fall semester, and their trip to Disney was coming up in just 6 weeks. When Aaron got home from work the day she'd finished her book, she met him at the door. "We're celebrating." He didn't argue, but instead looked at her questioningly. "What are we celebrating?" "I finished the book." "Really? Has anyone seen it yet?" "You've seen the first half, but no one else has seen a thing. I want you to take me out to a restaurant, and pretend I'm the most amazing woman on earth." Aaron grinned. "No pretense needed." Marissa stood on tiptoe and kissed him. "You're good for my ego." "Glad to hear it." "You're good for me too." He opened the door. "Let's go. I want to take you to Osaka, which is a hibachi steakhouse, and they also have sushi." "Does that sound good?" She nodded. "I love hibachi steak. I've only had it once, but the whole meal was really enjoyable." "Good." He drove through the streets of Coon Rapids, busy because it was a Friday night and school was about to start up again. "Do I get to read the rest of it tonight?" "Absolutely. I want to know if I got any details wrong. I've asked around, and I have an editor who is going to start on it on Friday of next week, so I need to do a read-through of my own before then, but I want you to do yours first. You'll be the one to know if I put a campfire in the wrong place, or if I did anything else that's not historically accurate." He reached over and squeezed her hand at a stoplight. "I'm so proud of you for finishing." She smiled, leaning her head against the back of the seat. "I cannot tell you how good it feels to finish a book. I feel like I'm flying." "Well, don't try to fly, because you don't have wings, but I think you're doing absolutely great. I am so excited for you." "Are you going to contact a publisher?" he asked. "I think I'm going to publish it as an indie. I've been doing research on that, and I have some good ideas about how I want to go about it." "You do what you think is best for you. I really don't care how you do it, as long as that book is published." "Oh, it will be. I didn't put that much work into it to let it sit on my computer for the next 30 years. "Glad to hear it." He really was excited. Romance wasn't his thing to read, of course, but he loved a good Oregon Trail book, and he'd really enjoyed the first half. She had written a good Oregon Trail book. He wanted to shout from the rooftops that his wife had finished a book, but the neighbors already thought he was crazy. Supper ended up being a wonderful experience. The hibachi chef had put on a good show, and they had found themselves laughing a lot with the other people at the table. One of the women had never been to a hibachi before, and she had thoroughly enjoyed the experience, making it more fun for the people around her. That evening when they arrived home, Aaron opened his email and immediately began reading, while Marissa hurried around the house, picking up for Mrs. Larson the following day. It was their weekend to go to his parents' house for supper, and she wondered how he'd get along with her parents. She wondered if they'd ever visit Minnesota. When he finished reading, Aaron found her in the living room, making sure nothing was left lying around for Mrs. Larson. "Your book is absolutely amazing. I loved how you took what we found out from those 2 journals and turned it into a love story. How on earth did you do that?" She shrugged. "Overactive imagination?" He laughed. "I don't think so. You did so good. I think you should quit your job and just write." She frowned. "Well, I've thought about going part-time, but I really do enjoy what I do. But if you could write for a living, why would you keep planning people's vacations? Do you have a problem with my career?" Aaron sighed. "I just think you could do so much more. Why not enroll at the college and get your master's?" She took a step back. "You're embarrassed of what I do." She'd never realized that he didn't think her job was good enough for a professor's wife, but it was obvious that's what he was thinking. "I'm not embarrassed, but you're too bright to do such a menial job." Marissa felt her anger rising. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a job that makes people happy. I happen to enjoy every minute of planning those vacations, and I have a very good knowledge of Disney. A knowledge that I've worked hard to perfect. She turned from him, too mad to look at him for a moment, but he caught her shoulder and turned her to him. I'm just trying to help you better yourself. Because now I'm not good enough? She was startled to hear the words from him. And hurt. Good night, Aaron. She turned from him and walked down to the bedroom where she'd slept her first few weeks there. Let me know when I'm good enough for you again, she said as the door closed behind her. As she lay in bed, she couldn't help but wonder if she was just being silly or if he really was being a jerk. It felt like he was going way overboard on how he was speaking to her. Yes, she could write a book, but she could also plan a darn good vacation for people. As she lay in bed, she said a silent prayer that things would work out between them, and then she fell asleep angry for the first time in their 2 months of marriage. Maybe a call to Dr. Lachele would help, but it was too late now. It was after 11 on the East Coast. Aaron watched the door close behind her, and wondered why she had gotten so upset with him. He really was trying to help her be a better person, and he couldn't figure out why that upset her so much. She couldn't possibly want to spend the rest of her life planning Disney vacations for people, could she? As he went to his lonely bed, he wished he knew what to say to her, to make her feel better. He certainly hadn't intended to offend her. She didn't need to work anyway. Marissa was up early on Saturday morning, as was her habit. She didn't worry about how loud she was as she made breakfast, because she didn't really care if she woke him up. He was usually up before her on Saturdays, so she had no idea why he was still in bed anyway. She had just put the eggs onto the counter to cook them when she heard the front door. Aaron came toward her with a huge bouquet of flowers, mixed blooms this time, and a bag of something. He handed her the flowers. I am so sorry I upset you last night. Marissa wasn't sure if he'd changed his mind about her job, but she decided it didn't matter. He was at least making an effort to make things better between them. I accept your apology. The words sounded a little stiff to her ears, but he didn't seem to mind. Then he thrust the bag at her, and she opened it to discover a virtual treasure trove of donuts. I got a little of everything, because I didn't know what kind of donut you like. I thought you might be a raspberry-filled girl, but I was really just guessing. I do like raspberry-filled. And lemon-filled. Those are my 2 favorites. I got both of those and lots of others. He leaned down and kissed her. I missed you last night. Her face softened into a smile. I missed you too. She hoped he wouldn't say anything else about her job, but she would forgive him for now. After breakfast, she worked on editing her book while he studied more of the journals. He'd made 10 or so notes in the margins, and her first task was to make sure she took care of everything he said was incorrect historically. By the end of the day, she'd covered half the book, and she felt like her brain was totally fried. I don't feel like cooking, she told him. Do you want to go out? I can't boil water to save my life. She grinned. Out or pick something up. My brain is spent. Why don't you order Chipotle from your app, and I'll go get it. We'll vegetate to a movie tonight. Aaron was surprised how much his life had changed since she'd come along. He'd once thought that spending a night in front of the TV was beneath him, and now it felt relaxing. He wanted to spend time with her just as much as he wanted to study. Thankfully, she granted him the time to study when he needed it. Sounds good. Do you want your usual? She asked. At his nod, she tapped a couple of buttons. It'll be ready in 20. Why is it so much faster to order now? He asked. They save our most recent order on the app. Now I just click to order the same thing again, and I'm ready to go. That sounds really easy to me. It is. Well, I'll be back in 30. He headed for the door, looking at her for a moment. How do you feel about the book now that you've read half of it over again? A slow grin spread across her face. I've written a book that I want to read. It's hard to believe, but I have. She could never find just the perfect book when she was looking for one, but she truly believed she'd written the perfect book for her and all people like her. Good for you. 3 weeks later, Marissa published her book. She was excited as she sat and waited for a first sale, and it came quickly. She told all of her family and friends about it, and several of them purchased it. Hopefully other people would find it and read it as well. Within minutes of hitting the publish button, she felt queasy and ran for the bathroom, losing her breakfast. She was glad Aaron was at work, so he couldn't make a big deal over it. The new semester had started, and he was enjoying his new set of classes. The students were doing a much better job about not stalking him in the hallways of the history building, which made him happy. After she sat for a moment, she thought about why she was sick, and she realized it must just be nerves from publishing the book. She knew family and friends were going to be reading it, and she wanted people to like it badly. She was sick throughout the day, but she was sure that as soon as reviews started coming in, she'd be fine. When she was still vomiting a week later, she was no longer so sure. She sat for a moment, thinking about why she could be sick, and then it hit her. She hadn't had a period since the first month they were married. As soon as the thought crossed her mind, she headed out to the Target around the corner. She bought 2 pregnancy tests, and took them back to their place and carefully read the instructions. She'd always heard a woman needed to take a pregnancy test first thing in the morning, but this test said she could take it at any time of day. Following the instructions, she waited her 3 minutes, pacing outside the bathroom, while trying frantically not to think about what it would mean for her life if it was positive. Aaron had said he wanted kids sometime in the future, but he wasn't ready for them immediately. Did that mean he'd be disappointed if she was pregnant? And if so, what did that mean for her? She knew her in-laws would be thrilled, and a pregnancy would probably get her mother to fly up from Arkansas. But Aaron. She needed Aaron to be happy. Finally, after a little more than 5 minutes, she walked into the bathroom and checked the test. The one she'd chosen had been made for an idiot. If she was pregnant, in the window it would say pregnant. If she wasn't, the word not would be in front of pregnant. Easy enough. Pregnant. She sat down on the edge of the tub and continued staring at the test, wondering how she was going to tell Aaron. She didn't even know if she was ready for a baby, but her heart was screaming that it loved the little thing, boy or girl. She sat on the side of the tub for more than an hour, trying to figure out what to do next. She wasn't even sure why she was so surprised that she was expecting. They hadn't been using protection, and they hadn't been practicing abstinence. So, what did she think was going to happen? Marissa finally got up, nuked the leftovers from the previous evening, and put them into a bag to take them to the college. The walk and her lunch with Aaron was usually the highlight of her day, but she worried the whole way there. Should she tell him right away? Or should she wait until she could think of a good way to tell him? She had no idea what to do, but deep down inside, she was thrilled she was having that baby. A part of her and a part of Aaron made from their passion. What more could she want in life? When she got to his office, there was a female student there with him, asking him questions, and she ignored the student as she set their lunch on his desk. The girl made a face. "Why are you here?" "I'm asking questions." Marissa smiled sweetly. "I'm the wife, and it's lunchtime, so you can keep asking, but I am going to keep getting ready to have lunch with my husband." The girl made a sound that could only have been made by a disgusted teenage girl, and then she rolled her eyes. "I'll talk to you before class tomorrow, Professor." Aaron nodded. "If you must." The same sound came from the girl and she stormed out of his office. Marissa laughed slightly. What was her question? "She's asking about women on the trail. I almost told her to read your book for a historically accurate fictionalized story, but I decided against it." He looked down at the bowl in front of him. "Oh, you brought lasagna. I love your lasagna." As they ate, he told her about the new crop of girls in his classes. "I made sure to mention my wife the first day of class in every single section I'm teaching, and they're still being annoying. It must be hard to be the most handsome professor on campus. Maybe someday someone will move in and steal all your admirers away." "That would be tragic, wouldn't it?" Bob walked in then, grinning at the two of them. "You two look a little happier every time I see you." Aaron smiled. Well, I did marry an intelligent woman who loves the trail almost as much as I do. What would you have done if she hadn't been interested in the Oregon Trail? Bob asked, grinning. Probably thrown her back and tried for a new one, Aaron said with a grin. Then I guess it's a good thing I like the trail, Marissa said, knowing Aaron didn't mean anything by what he'd just said. He was joking, and it shouldn't hurt her feelings, but it did. She was very aware that it was just her hormones throwing her off, but she didn't care. She finished her lunch while Bob and Aaron talked work, and then she cleaned things up. With a kiss on Aaron's cheek, she said, "I'll see you later." Aaron watched her go with a slight frown. She'd been very quiet. Usually she joined in the conversation when Bob came in to talk to him while they were having lunch. He didn't know what was wrong, but he hoped she'd be okay by the time he got home. He wanted to read whatever she'd written that day. Marissa walked into the apartment and went straight to her laptop to Google OB/GYNs in the area. She needed to find a good one to confirm the pregnancy. She'd decided she wasn't going to tell Aaron until she knew for sure, though deep down she did know for sure. She was pregnant, and they were both going to have to live with it. Chapter 10. It took Marissa 2 weeks to get into the doctor she had chosen, and when she went in, she was nervous. The pregnancy was quickly confirmed, and they did a quick ultrasound to check how the baby was growing. "I'd say you're about 8 weeks, the doctor, an older woman with dark hair, told her. That was what I was thinking. So, 32 more weeks. Already counting down? I'm having really bad all-day sickness." It had been all Marissa could do to keep her illness from Aaron. All-day sickness isn't good. I can prescribe some Zofran if you'd like. It'll help with the nausea, and it's safe for your pregnancy. Marissa slowly nodded. She didn't want to have to quit working just yet, but she knew that soon she'd be writing and not planning the Disney vacations. She thought about writing too much to be able to stop, and with how she was feeling, she could no longer do both. "I think that would be good. Do you have a pharmacy you use?" "No, I don't. I haven't been here long. I'll just use a Walgreens, I guess." "That's fine. I'll call it in, and you can pick it up this afternoon." The doctor felt around on her still flat belly. "Other than the morning sickness, how are you doing?" She shrugged. "I'm more emotional than usual. The slightest thing is making me cry, and I'm making my husband crazy." The doctor laughed. "That's very normal. Don't worry about it. I'm sure he understands that it's the pregnancy." Marissa didn't tell the doctor she hadn't told Aaron yet. "We have a trip to Disney planned the first week in October. You're fine to go. Just stay away from the roller coasters and you'll be fine. You're early enough in the pregnancy that I don't see it being a problem for you." "Good. I was a little worried about that, because I've already got it booked and ready to go. We even have our flights." "No worries. I need to see you in about a month. We'll do another ultrasound then, so you may want to bring your husband." Marissa nodded. "I'll ask him if he wants to be here." On the drive home, Marissa thought about how many different ways she could break the news to Aaron. He'd be home from work in an hour, and she needed to just sit him down and tell him. Hopefully, he'd be open to the idea of a child much sooner than he'd planned, but she needed to give him the news first, and not someone else. Though she desperately wished she could tell Janelle and get advice. She was sitting in the living room going over scenarios of how he would react when he walked in the door. Aaron saw Marissa sitting on the couch staring off at nothing when he walked in the door. He couldn't smell any food cooking either. Marissa was always working on something, whether research or reading or cooking or something. Never had he seen her just sit and stare into space. He sat down beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked, worried. He was ready to take her to the hospital if needed, but hopefully it wouldn't be. She turned to him with a smile and nodded. "I just got home from the doctor's office." "Something is wrong?" Whatever it was, they'd handle it together. He couldn't lose her now. He was head over heels in love with her. "Nothing is wrong. I've been throwing up for about 3 weeks, and I went to confirm my suspicions." She hoped he'd understand from that, but as usual, the absent-minded professor missed what she was trying to say. What suspicions? I'm pregnant, she said softly, watching his face carefully for a response. His eyes grew wide and his jaw dropped. Pregnant? He stared at her in shock for a moment. She nodded. I know you said you didn't want kids until sometime in the future, but that time seems to be now. I'm not even sure what to say. He was too stunned to make much of the conversation. Well, you better say something fast, because you're freaking me out here. He smiled, and then she could see his answer. I'm going to be a father. When can we find out the sex? You're happy? Marissa asked, needing to hear him say the words. Very. He pulled her against him and kissed her soundly. We're having a baby. I need to call my mom, but I wanted to tell you first. And she needed to call Dr. Lachele. I'm glad you did. I need to call my mom too. They both made their phone calls, and after, he looked at her. Let's go out for supper. I don't think you should have to cook. Not unless you just want to. She laughed. I'll be cooking just as much as I always do. I just wanted tonight off. We need to go to the pharmacy and pick up a couple of prescriptions. Prescriptions? Is something going wrong? Now that he knew he would be a father, he couldn't imagine her losing the baby. They would do whatever it took to keep that child healthy. I'm having a lot of morning sickness, so I need to pick up a prescription for that, and then I need a prenatal vitamin. Sounds good to me. I hate that you've been sick. Why didn't you tell me? She shrugged. I didn't know how. You said you wanted kids in the future, and I wasn't sure if it was too soon for you, so I waited until it was confirmed and then I told you. I talked to the doctor this afternoon. All right. What do you want to eat? How would you feel about just picking up a pizza and my prescription and eating here? I think I want a true vegetate night. No journals. No words. Just the two of us, celebrating that we're going to be parents. I think that sounds perfect. Where is the prescription? She gave him the address of the Walgreens, and then while he was gone, she changed into pajamas. She hadn't really gained any weight, but she could feel her pants getting a tiny bit tighter, and she was definitely more comfortable with nothing pressing on her belly. The evening went well with the two of them watching a movie they both enjoyed while snacking on the pizza. After the movie, he looked over at her. My mind is still spinning a little. Are you going to keep working? She shook her head. No, I think I need to give my notice, though I hate to leave the job. My mind is preoccupied with writing, and I need to make that happen. The day job will have to go. I think that's for the best. Inside, he was jumping for joy that she was no longer going to be planning vacations for people. He just thought she could do so many better things with her time. I did ask the doctor about our Disney trip, and she said it was fine. Just no roller coasters, but I don't tend to do them anyway. He nodded. All right. We'll still go. That's coming up fast. He still wasn't sure he wanted to go, but he knew she had her heart set on it. It is. I can't wait to show you the world I've fallen in love with. I've planned 2 days at Epcot, 1 at Magic Kingdom, and 1 at Hollywood Studios. We'll do food and wine, and I managed to get into my favorite restaurant at Magic Kingdom, so we'll have fun there too. He smiled. I'm sure we'll love it. Though he wasn't sure, he wasn't going to argue with her because he felt like he'd already won a huge battle. She was going to give her notice. I sure hope you love it as much as I do. I want to do yearly Disney vacations for the rest of my life. He thought she was crazy, but he said nothing. If that's what she wanted, he wouldn't argue with her. She was carrying his child after all. Mom is really excited about the baby. She said to tell you that you can't cook anymore. Marissa laughed and shook her head. Tell her we don't have a live-in maid, and I'm happy cooking. If I did that, she'd want us to move in with them, and that's not happening. I can agree with that. I figured we'd turn the spare room into a nursery. Sounds good to me. That'll make things easy for us. We can even buy a house soon if you want. I don't really want to raise a child in an apartment. Marissa nodded, biting her lip. There's something we've never talked about. As soon as I met you, I was sure that I would want us to separate as soon as our year was up. But now, I think I want to stay with you forever, which is good with us expecting. I didn't realize you were still thinking you'd leave, he said with a frown. I guess when we started getting along, and we made love, I just assumed you were in it forever. And I think I was. I just wanted to make sure you didn't think that I was still thinking of running off at the first available moment. Not at all, I couldn't take it if you did leave. Aaron took a deep breath. I always kind of thought I was beyond falling in love. I mean, I'm intelligent and educated, and I didn't feel like I needed another person to complete me. The only reason I ever went to Dr. Lachele is so that I could get tenure and hopefully keep the girls off my back. He shook his head. I never expected to spend 2 days getting to know my new wife and fall so deeply in love with her I couldn't imagine trying to get out. Wait, you love me? Marissa hadn't expected to ever hear those words from Aaron. He just didn't seem like the type to say them. Aaron nodded. I do love you. I've loved you from the first weekend we were married. I think when you started liking the Oregon Trail, I knew I was lost. So many girls were trying to get my attention by pretending an interest, but you were already married to me. I knew it wasn't pretense from you. It never was pretense. Oh, Aaron, I love you too. I've loved you from the beginning, even when I thought you were a dopey absent-minded professor who only cared about the past. She threw herself at him, almost knocking him off the couch. He grinned, wrapping his arms around her. So, I'm married, in love, and having a baby. Who would have thought this is where I would end up 6 months ago? You make me very happy, Marissa. Everything about you is absolutely perfect to me. So, you don't think I need to go back to school to better myself? He shook his head. Not at all. You're perfect just the way you are. Epilogue. Marissa couldn't stop smiling as they got out of the Uber that took them from the airport to Disney's Saratoga Springs Resort. A bellhop was right there to take their things, and she walked into the main lobby, smiling at the person who said, "Welcome home." I need to check in, Marissa said, and she was guided to the right line, where she stood for just a minute. She knew exactly what they would do while they were there down to the last meal. Though she was no longer planning other people's Disney vacations, she was definitely going to keep planning theirs. After checking in, they walked 2 buildings over to their room, a 1-bedroom with kitchen and 2 baths. She showed Aaron all the features of their room while they waited for their luggage, which arrived promptly. Are you tired? Marissa asked. We have dinner reservations in Disney Springs in 2 hours, but we could nap before if you wanted. He nodded. Flights exhaust me. Then we'll sleep for an hour, and then catch a boat to Disney Springs. A boat? He asked. He'd assumed they'd take buses everywhere. She nodded. Yes, there's a boat between our resort and Disney Springs. We'll take buses to Magic Kingdom and Epcot, but on some nights, I have us taking the monorail to dinner. You'll find there's a good variety of ways to get around. We're doing Epcot tomorrow, and I can't wait to introduce you to food and wine. I just know you're going to love Disney almost as much as I do. She hadn't yet mentioned the minivan, but she'd make sure they took it. It would make her so happy. He shrugged. It doesn't matter if I love it or not. We'll come back every year. She frowned. Why do you say that? Because it's worth it to come here just to see you get as excited as you are right now. Your smile, well, it could light up the whole of Disney World, and I think we should come again and again. Oh, good, because if we have a girl, we're doing the Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique. The what? Aaron wasn't even sure what that tongue twister was all about. You'll see.